everyone to our Women in Security conference at the UCLA Luskin Center here in Los Angeles. First up, we have our keynote virtual address by Dr. Aji Mann. She is a security analyst and narrative warfare specialist. She holds a professorship in global security, Center for the Future of War, and serves as the brain trust of the Weaponized Narrative Initiative, both at Arizona State University. She's also an adjunct professor with the Joint Special Operations University and a training program for the U.S. Special Operations Forces. Dr. Mann is the author of 9 books, columnist for Homeland Security Today, and CEO of the award-winning Think and Do Tank, Narrative Strategies, LLC. So, Dr. Mann, thank you.
Good morning. I'd like to thank the organizing committee of the International Counterterrorism Institute for inviting me to speak with you today. In my multiple day jobs, I deal with the psychological foundations of large-scale conflict. I coined the term narrative warfare back in 2018 to describe the aspects of this kind of conflict. And I'll address narrative warfare and specifically the disinformation aspect in just a moment. But before I do, I'd like to make some preliminary thoughts about that are relevant to this audience in particular. As the general theme is women and security, I'd like to address certain caution points and to suggest areas in which there remains a tremendous amount of work for us to be doing. My concerns have to do with how we conceptualize our work as women in security and how we conceptualize security for women. The inclusion of more women in policy-making roles and the inclusion of women's issues on the security agenda is a good place to start, but it's only a start. Simply adding women to the mix doesn't solve the problems associated with security for women for several reasons. First, security for women is different than security for men. Groups like Al-Qaeda and Boko Haram absolutely understand that difference, and they're acting on it. Second, violence against women and girls is a special type of warfare, as understood by UN Security Council Resolution 1325 and by common sense. Third, women's issues are not women's work. Violence against women is a fact of warfare of the good old-fashioned male variety. And even male policymakers are obliged to address it. Fourth, empowered women's voices pose a tremendous threat, a weapon against groups like ISIS, the Taliban, and incels. Any security policy that does not recognize and implement strategies to address the points I've just made is non-comprehensive and inadequate. Thinking about women and security ought to proceed by asking if traditional conceptual frameworks are adequate to accommodate issues that disproportionately affect women's security. And women should not have the monopoly on rethinking those frameworks. We, those of us in the security field, regardless of our anatomy, should question assumptions that surround concepts as basic as what security is and for whom. And we should be asking ourselves what kind of policy changes would result from understanding women and girls as special types of targets. Assuming that the participation of women will naturally lead to policies that address issues that disproportionately affect women assumes that men are incapable or unwilling to consider the welfare of half the world's population. That's an assumption I don't make, nor do I make the assumption that female participation will naturally lead to enlightened policies. Women are just as capable as men of continuing the traditional security policies. Adding women to the mix is not enough. What we need are people people armed with the capacity to uncover useless or harmful assumptions, people that understand that women's issues are not subcategories of security. And there are issues that aren't necessarily gendered, but could use some rethinking. For example, we hear the words security and defense associated together. I'm often described as a security and defense policy analyst. But if I do my job well, my job is not primarily defensive, it's offensive. What would result if we attach our understanding of security primarily to offense? In terms of physical security, we talk about preventative measures, but preventative measures are conceptually attached to an understanding of security as primarily defensive. Our words and our concepts ought to match up with our practices. Words and concepts are important. They are important in the realm of security, but particularly in the cognitive realm. So let's talk about cognitive security and narrative warfare. I come to the topic of disinformation and malign influence from the perspective of terrorist recruitment. The simple questions I began with many years ago were, how do bad actors get people to engage in extreme behaviors like homicide and suicide without physical coercion, sometimes even without personal contact? What makes some people vulnerable to recruitment and others less vulnerable? Most of the attempts to answer these questions have focused on the tactics themselves, that is, the information being conveyed. My work looks beyond the information, even beyond the information processing, to the psychological assault on the target. I've demonstrated the ways in which recruiters don't just target an audience, they fundamentally change the target, him or herself. The facts-based approach to domestic extremism proposed by the Biden administration suggests an awareness shared by many that disinformation has played a role in radicalization. But disinformation is not the start of radicalization. Disinformation doesn't work on everyone. And yet the same factors that make an audience vulnerable to recruitment by ISIS make an audience vulnerable to recruitment by the Proud Boys. We ought to focus on understanding what factors create an audience ripe for recruitment. The reasons we're having trouble getting on top of disinformation in this country and many others is that we are mislabeling and therefore misunderstanding the phenomenon. Again, words are important. We are not dealing simply with wrong information. We're dealing with weaponized information in story form. If it wasn't, it wouldn't be dangerous. There's nothing inherently seductive about information, whether true or false. That's why we use storytelling. Stories play a special role in human cognition. Our brains are receptive to stories, particularly stories about ourselves or stories in which we can see ourselves, project ourselves into. And we're particularly receptive to stories that speak to our preferred identities, especially if we feel like our identities are under threat. And stories give us a way out, a way to respond to that threat. The root cause of vulnerability to disinformation goes deeper than the amount or the degree of exposure to false information. Narrative identity is what's at play. Truth cannot effectively counter disinformation because raw data is not inherently influential. But if data is storified, mythologized, narrated, then it can have influence, whether that data is true or false. That's because stories tell us something we crave. They tell us meaning. Whether the information is true or false, stories tell us the meaning of the information. And that is not a new phenomenon. Humans have a long history of finding or creating meaning in the absence of facts. For example, the Iliad by Homer has had a profound influence on Western audiences, even though it's not history, it's a myth. Nonetheless, the story of a heroic quest of a rugged individual gives people a way to understand, to frame their own challenges. It gives a way for people to view their own battles and obstacles and hurdles in a heroic light. That frame of reference has been repeated for centuries and can be seen in modern culture, in novels and movies and biographies, and in the way we understand our daily lives. The lack of truth value of the narrative is irrelevant to the meaning it imparts to our own experience. Just because it's not true doesn't mean that it's not meaningful. And when disinformation is well received, that is because the disinformation held deeper meaning for the audience than the truth. An effective narrator speaks to two essential things: the meaning of the information and the identity of the audience. Meaning and identity are tied together to produce a story that tells what the information means, not just obscurely, but what the information means to that audience. A story designed to influence will tell an audience what to make of the information, how to understand it, and how they fit in. Just as the power of stories, of myths, of narratives does not rely on truth or facts or accuracy of the information for its effect, so too disinformation is storified, mythologized, and narrated. It gives people a way to understand their experiences in a way that is, in fact, impervious to the truth. That is the problem we face. The problem is more profound than disinformation. We're dealing with weaponized narratives, and a facts-based approach will prove impotent against it. So, how am I using the term narrative, and how does it differ from stories? This is a crucial distinction. A narrative is a meta. It's a thematic cultural product that gives people a way in a particular culture to understand their environment, their context, and their identity within it. A narrative provides a pattern of meaning for what would otherwise seem like random experience. A story is a particular example of that. So narratives are meta, stories are minor, they're multiple, and they're very conscious, whereas narratives are generally not. We generally don't tell narratives. We tell stories that are derived from narratives. So, for example, the heroic journey is a narrative. All the stories, novels, memoirs, biographies that repeat that structure and that content and that meaning and those identity elements of the narrative, those are stories. Stories generally make direct reference. Don't generally make direct reference to a narrative. The reference is indirect, implied, sometimes unconscious, and yet it's intimately familiar to those who share the same cultural foundation. We don't consciously think about how to structure our stories because our cultural inheritance has already determined that for us. Our stories reflect the structure of our narrative and the content of our cultural narrative. We don't think about narratives in general. They operate mostly on the level of assumption. And those assumptions leave our narratives vulnerable to exploitation. Weaponized narratives hit our assumptions, not our rational thought. Cognitive security requires that we turn our attention to that which we routinely assume. This is where our adversaries are hitting us hard. Our assumptions are not the results of a rational process, nor should the challenge to our assumptions be. Our adversaries understand that concept, have embraced it, and have incorporated strategic narratives across their operations. ISIS, the Taliban, Al Qaeda, the Boogaloo Boys, the Oath Keepers, Proud Boys effectively disseminate their narratives, their brand, and reinforce their ideologies through broad information and psychological operations to control their strategic narrative. By doing so, they determine the meaning of the information and the actions that result. That is because people are not generally moved by simply observing the unfolding of events. And even if they are, they don't know what to make of it. But the representation of the unfolding of events has the power of its own. The representation of the unfolding of events, the narrative, ties events together in such a way that it imbues those events with meaning. So narratives don't just describe events, they show us how to understand them. That's what distinguishes narrative warfare from information wars. Narrative warfare is not conflict over information, it's conflict over the meaning of the information. Domination of the narrative field will not be achieved by those with the most information or the most accurate information. It'll be won by those who determine the meaning of the information. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mann, for that keynote address. And up next is Ms. Kelly Bond in our DEI series, Access and Accommodation.
Thank you for joining the Global Counterterrorism Institute's special studio recording of accessibility and accommodations around the world. My name is Kelly Bond. As the researcher and author of this presentation, I had originally delivered it before a live audience at GCTI's Women in Security Conference, June 3rd, 2023 in Los Angeles. It was part of the event's diversity and inclusion offerings. I'm the founder and co-principal of Olakam Hana Spirit, or Olahana for short, in the native Hawaiian language representing 25% of my heritage. Ola means life and Hana means work. I provide consulting and interim leadership primarily in learning and development, editorial services, internal and external communications, organizational effectiveness, and HR. I've combined these fields professionally since 1977. In 1980, I added diversity, equity, inclusion, and social justice as part of my first full-time HR job in the corporate world. My specialty is in disability issues at all ages, stages, and environments, alongside how disability intersects with different aspects of one's identity. In my work, I draw on solid research and multiple perspectives. Those perspectives include a member of management inside and outside HR, classroom teacher, corporate trainer and group facilitator, loved one, significant other, and so many more. I also have lived experience with neurodivergent conditions, which I'll talk more about at the end of this presentation. What's in this presentation for you? At the end of it, you will be able to, number one, distinguish between accessibility and accommodation. Number two, quantify the following: those worldwide who have a significant disability, the countries that have laws mandating accessibility and accommodations, adults in the U.S. considered to have a disability. Number three, counter-argue common reasons some businesses give for withholding or short-circuiting access and accommodations for their workers and other stakeholders. Number 4, obtain examples of effective accommodations and access. And finally, number 5, identify 3 accessibility measures you can use immediately. Here's a question for you. Of these 2 images, which best represents the word accessibility? If you answered yes to the one on the right, you're in great company. Most people answered that way. They agree that accessibility is proactive. In the disability context, it entails advanced planning and setting up environments where everyone can succeed in its use. In short, it's group-oriented. On the other hand, accommodation is individual and therefore reactive on the part of the decision maker or gatekeeper. A person requests the way or ways he or she can access an environment, such as a classroom or workplace or another type of business, and succeed in it. We need both accessibility and accommodation for everyone's full inclusion and participation in society. Now that we've discussed the difference between accommodation and accessibility, let's talk about the latest numbers. As of this past March, 1.6 million people worldwide have a significant disability. That's defined as any condition with adverse impact on one or more major life activities. That number, by the way, comes from the World Health Organization. Our second number includes the UK, Canada, and the US. They are among the 121 countries or areas that have laws on the books protecting the rights of people with disabilities. Those figures come from an undated UN document I estimated was published sometime in or after 2018 based on some of the entries. Now, keep in mind a similar UN report from around 2011 or 2012 is still circulating on the web. That one states 45 countries or areas. However, 121 is the most recent and the one you should use for now. Finally, the 1 in 5 number reported in May by the Job Accommodation Network, or JAN, has held steady for about the last 10 to 15 years. It reflects people 16 to 64 years old who have a disability. Next, we'll take a look at the most common reasons given to sidestep or avoid providing accommodations and accessibility. Most barriers to accessibility are those of attitude on the part of decision makers or gatekeepers. What are the most common reasons they give? Of the 7 I'm about to present, 5 of them are most common. The first one, they're a sure sign of favoritism. As a manager, I treat each of my employees the same. Well, most people have heard that first one or some variation on it. It's the biggest clue that someone with a formal leadership title, whether that's supervisor, manager, director, vice president, chief of whatever, etc., is trying desperately to impose a one-size-fits-all standard of people management in the name of fairness. Today's workers at all levels of an organization, with or without a disability, are rightly demanding a more individualized workplace experience while being held accountable for the published standards of their job and the rules of the organization. Now, that's what I call fairness. For the second bullet, disabilities are what kids have. I write checks for these every year. These fulfill my obligations. This kind of thinking was common as recently as the early 1990s, when the Americans with Disabilities Act took effect in the US. Back then, diagnoses and services for adults with neurodivergent conditions and other health conditions associated with childhood were practically non-existent. Times have changed considerably, especially over the last 15 to 20 years. Third bullet, those people will miss too many days of work. Pushback based on perceptions of job performance and the disease model of disability are still all too common today. In 2018, the Center for Disability Awareness cited material that Fort Meade had issued. 86% of employees with a disability had average or better attendance. A closely related myth is that people with disabilities are a safety hazard and cause some of these absences. Those same sources state that nearly 100% rank average or higher for workplace safety practices. Number 4, I'm running a business, not a charity. What we need to do for those people are just too expensive. Resistance based on perceived cost is still number 1. Jan ran a survey over 5 calendar years, beginning in January 2018 and ending last December 31st. 3,528 employers of all sizes responded. Of those 3,528, 720 reported cost information about accommodations. 49.4% said their accommodations cost nothing. 43.3% declared a one-time cost averaging $300. The remaining 7.3% had ongoing costs averaging around $3,500 a year. No cost or low cost is consistent with Jan's previous studies. In fact, that $300 is a drop from the $500 in Jan's earlier reports. Number 5, if I accommodate, then that means I'm lowering my standards. That's another piece of perceived performance-based pushback. Accommodations actually give their requesters the chance to meet, if not exceed, the quality and quantity requirements for the job's essential functions. And in many cases, they do meet or exceed those requirements. No standards ever need to be lowered. And if those same requesters start falling short of published performance standards, then they can and should be subject to the same coaching and corrective processes as others in your department or organization. Number 6, only smart, educated people work for me or do business with this organization. Unfortunately, that belief lingers, especially in some circles outside the US and people from those circles employed in the US. It comes from a long-standing notion that people with disabilities are poorly educated, have intellectual disabilities, or both. Finally, number 7. You'd think we're operating a hospital with all the stuff we have to do around here for accessibility. Fortunately, that belief is quite uncommon. Let's now focus on a few examples of positive steps toward making workplaces and facilities or properties more truly welcoming for all. We'll begin this section with the best general workplace accommodation examples. First up, Sodexo. The company is best known as a worldwide food service vendor for numerous military bases and other venues at all levels of government, plus big corporations. At Sodexo, a senior cook had disclosed a newly diagnosed seizure condition. The additional challenge was that his kitchen was short-staffed. So, coworkers took over lifting heavy boxes and climbing, while the cook himself agreed to perform all the other essential functions of his job. These resulted in a happy employee, a happy manager, and a happy company. Second is Lowe's, the large home improvement retailer heavily concentrated in the US. It has an ongoing program putting some of the US military veterans with PTSD and their service dogs to work the sales floor. In the photo is Travis Landchild and Nightshade from the Willoughby, Ohio store in suburban Cleveland. As a result of this commitment, I've made Lowe's my primary home improvement store. How about accessible buildings and complexes? It's now time to take a look at the best accessible community examples. And we'll start with the now 9-year-old Capita Green office skyscraper in Singapore. It's part of Capital Land's portfolio. What struck me about this building, besides its 40 stories, is how the building has no visible interior columns. This is unusual because those columns are load bearing for the building. They save developers from having to use more expensive materials and construction methods to invisibly stand up multiple floors of space from foundation to ceiling. What's more, visible columns limit free movement, whether on foot or in a chair or scooter. How about the Mushholm Sports Holiday and Conference Complex in Denmark? The Danish Muscular Dystrophy Foundation owns this center. It was originally built in 1998 and completely remodeled in 2015. Its multiple award-winning design features a wheelchair basketball court, motorized curtains, beds that can be raised or reclined in the 24 guest rooms, and many more. Given Stephanie Prentice's presentation for this conference on gender, given the very title of this conference, and given the incursions on reproductive health in the United States, I must acknowledge today's undisputed world leader in pregnancy-related and baby bonding leaves. That's Scandinavia. What the countries have in common, 5 of them, that consist of Iceland, Denmark, Norway, Finland, and Sweden, is that the moms and dads share this leave with certain amount of hours to be split however the parents wish. Norway has the best payout with 100% pay for 49 weeks or 80% pay for 59 weeks. Finally, no discussion today on accessibility and accommodation is complete without mention of technology. Regardless of the position you hold in an organization, you can start doing these 3 things today. First is closed captioning. All the major online meeting tools have them. The transcript option is best, as that is the one that can be saved. Second, hashtags. I was once reminded that someone had asked about LA Pride. That's a two-word phrase, LA being the first word and pride being the second. At the same time, someone was reported to have asked, "What's a lap ride?" The person who answered was truly puzzled until they finally figured out the organization's all lowercase hashtag was the source of that unintentional humor. The guideline for hashtags is easy to remember. Just initial cap each word as shown in the middle graphic. Third, and finally, alt text. This allows digital photos, illustrations, and other graphics to be picked up by a screen reader and translated for those who have low vision or who are blind. This presentation has been made in honor and loving memory of retired U.S. Army Major J. Duncan Southall. He's widely known as JD. JD was the first student in GCTI's Masters in International Security Studies program starting the spring of 2021. When he passed away in his sleep the day after his 58th birthday late last summer, he was well into completing his major research project. A GCTI team is about to finish his work so that it may be published and his degree issued posthumously. For greater impact with elected officials in the U.S. and other key decision makers throughout the world, that thesis will be combined with the Change.org petition JD and I co-wrote and launched nearly 2 years ago. At the heart of his thesis and our petition is the 100-plus Iraqi prisoners JD and his 11 fellow soldiers of the Oregon National Guard rescued on June 29, 2004. The ordeal left him with significant post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. It was worsened by the 7 or so traumatic brain injuries he had also sustained over several years between his service in Iraq and Afghanistan. Like me, JD is what educational psychologists call twice exceptional. These are people who have one or more neurodivergent conditions, often from their early years, and whose innate wealth of knowledge and ability to reason, think critically, and problem solve is in the top 0.1% to 5% of the overall population. In JD's case, undiagnosed dyslexia and ADHD already accompanied his stratospheric intelligence before his combat injuries were added to the mix. In my case, I have ADHD and dyspraxia diagnosed in my 1960s childhood with a reportedly similar intelligence level. More than that, JD's outstanding emotional intelligence came through immediately when we had connected on LinkedIn in early 2021. Like his much revered mother who preceded him in death by 15 years, JD placed the highest premium on people and pets, all living things really. He and I found we both had a multitude of common, deep interests, alongside a simultaneous joy in living and a deep introspection teamed with a tremendous appreciation for the absurd. What's more, between the two of us, we have at least 4 first-degree relatives who have autism. I credit JD with spurring me to fully, unapologetically, and publicly own my many intersectional identities from historically underrepresented groups. He brought me back to a spirit of dialogue and bridge building in my DEI and disability advocacy. For those and many other reasons, This presentation is one of my ways of thanking him for being my profoundly beloved friend and colleague. You may contact me through GCTI by email, snail mail, telephone, or their website. Please also use those same methods to learn more about GCTI's programs and services. Thank you.
Next up is Miss Amber Oquindo. She is the Distinguished Research Fellow and Director of the Operations at Global Counterterrorism Institute. With a Master of Science degree in Homeland Security Management, Amber's academic focus on terrorism has equipped her with a comprehensive understanding of various facets, including recruitment, propaganda, radicalization, and the utilization of social media for self-radicalization. Beyond her academic pursuits, she actively collaborates with nonprofit organizations to advance radicalization awareness, intervention, education, and the empowerment of marginalized communities worldwide. With that, Ms. Amber is going to go over the SEEDS program, the Security Enhancement Education Defense Seminars. And so at this time, I will turn it over to Ms. Amber Oquindo. So at this time, we're going to introduce our SEEDS program. If you're not familiar, that's Security Enhancement Education Defense Seminar. Amber and I developed that in line with I'm going to say a U.S. State Department grant we were working on that covers 5 different areas or a few different countries that we're working. So with that, we're going to go over what the SEEDS program is, what it stands for, and you're going to get the first glimpse of 2 of the presentations, one in malign influence and disinformation, and building resilience and climate change. For those of you that paid for the seminar, you will receive that content. You'll actually be able to train the trainer with those to train other people in those areas. I'll let Amber tell you exactly what the SEEDS program is.
Thank you. So SEEDS, as Todd said, is our Security Enhancement Educational Defense Seminar. So as we know, the world is interconnected, thus security gets more and more complex. And what we've really intended to do is shake up the idea of what security means, especially when we're talking about education, because there seems to be a disconnect between what we learn and what we experience. So we really wanted to introduce this program, which is really in itself a powerhouse designed to bridge that gap. And in connection with our Women in Security program, where we can not only bridge the gap between security and practice, but we can also bring women to the forefront. Because as we know, our theme this weekend is all about women in security. So what happens when we really bring women to the forefront? We're going to see a different type of collaboration. We're going to see a different type of result when we come together and we work together. Because as we've talked about today, and as we will continue to talk about through this weekend, our experiences are different, our perceptions are different, therefore our results will be different. And once we collaborate, men and women together, we're going to be able to build a more resilient security industry. So more about our SEEDS particularly. When we're talking about security, it is multifaceted, right? It's all about keeping the world safe and sound, and that covers everything: military, political, economic aspects of the world, environment to cybersecurity, and everything in between. So we've got it covered because it's not one-dimensional, so we're going to go in all different directions here, and we're going to really change how we view security today. When we're talking about enhancement, that's that sprinkle of magic that makes everything better, right? We have what we have, but we're going to make it better. Because as we grow, as we learn, as we bring new perspectives of those who have been in the industry, from those who are just entering the industry, how we grow up is very different, so our perceptions are different. We have to bridge that gap, That's going to be that extra bit of magic. When we're talking about education, this is really becoming the global citizenship for students. Never has it been easier to connect across the world. Never has it been easier to ask questions, get answers, collaborate with individuals around the world. So we're not just here to talk about the basics, but we're here to really ignite a fire in between all of us together in promoting understanding, empathy, and respect for our diverse cultures and our backgrounds. That's how we're going to get the security industry to the next stage. When we work together with that understanding, not just the academia part of education, but the connection to who you're working with, that's really going to allow us to tackle the global issues that have been prevalent forever: poverty, inequality, and now climate change is becoming so important. And then when we talk about the benefits of diversity, when we're talking about bringing women and their unique perspectives to the table, that's when we're going to see the collaboration happen. The individuals in this room and online with us today, we are building a more collaborative, understanding, empathetic, and resilient security industry for tomorrow. So our SEEDS program is really just blanking out on my word. It is really just a way for us to step forward into tomorrow with better ideas, better collaboration, better understanding, and taking what is known as climate change or disinformation, as we're going to hear about more in detail, and really understanding what does that mean, what are those impacts, because the information that we absorb day to day is not going to tell us how to move forward, but when we come together, that's how we're going to determine what the problem is, how to fix it, and how we're going to get there. So that's just a brief introduction to our SEEDS program as a whole. And then, as Todd said, we'll just take a quick break. And then when we come back, he'll go over his resiliency to climate change program more in detail. And I'll go over malign influence and misinformation. So, thank you.
So in response to Dr. Aji Mann's video this morning, we asked Dr. Alan Britton, who is now a retired nuclear scientist, to talk about nuclear security, which covers one of the 8 domains of global security. And he's going to do what we call a guest intervention. We've had that done from the State Department in the past by people. So we're going to give Dr. Britton a few minutes to talk about his reflections on women and security, because he is a big proponent of that. So Dr. Britton, if you can make sure you use your outside voice, that way the audience can hear you. Go ahead.
Todd, thank you very much for your introduction, and can I also echo what has been said earlier and welcome you all to this Women in Security Hybrid Conference. Today, I'd just like to talk to you about women in security, which is...
Just a second. Go ahead.
Today, I would like to talk to you about women in security, which is, as we know, a very important topic for the world's future of peace and stability. Now, women have been involved in security for a long time, but their contributions have been overlooked and undervalued. Now, according to a study by the Science Direct, women make up 24% of investigations and security services sector and 44% of private detectives and investigators. These numbers show that there is still a significant gender gap in security, especially in leadership positions. Now, we need to ask ourselves, why does this matter? Because security is not only a matter of protecting people and assets from threats, but also a matter of advancing human rights, justice, and equality. Now, as the Women in International Security Organization states on its website, gender equal societies are more stable and peaceful. And when women are involved in foreign policy, can be a more powerful tool to achieve peace and security. Now, women bring diverse perspectives, skills, and experiences to the security sector, which can help address complex challenges such as terrorism, cybercrime, climate change, pandemics, and gender-based violence. And women can also build trust and rapport with local communities, especially women with children, who are often the most vulnerable and affected by insecurity. Now, women can face many barriers and challenges in pursuing careers in security, such as discrimination, harassment, stereotypes, lack of mentorship, and limited opportunities for training and advancement. These obstacles limit women's potential and undermine the effectiveness and legitimacy of security institutions. Now, the GCTI advocates for gender equality and the advancement of women in international peace and security through research, publications, events like this, and networking. As a senior research fellow and mentor with the GCTI, I am proud to be part of an institution that values diversity and inclusion in security, education and training. I invite you all to join me and the Institute in supporting women in security through this event, not only today, but every day. With the final thought, together we can make a difference in a more secure and peaceful world. Thank you, and I do hope you enjoy your time with us.
Thank you, Dr. Britton. And so, in the spirit of what Dr. Britton was saying, for those of you that don't know, I think everybody in the room at this point understands that we're a woman in security program, that we're empowering women within our organization. And through that, we had developed a few collaborations over the years. The first collaboration within ourselves was building our own programs. And Ms. Aquindo and I developed a master's program that was picked up by Paris graduates. And so with that, how many of our students from our program are here? Yeah. So Dennis is one of our first graduates from our International Security Studies diploma program, plus we have a criminal justice program that we just do online. And it's a little bit unique and different because we don't just do the theories and everything. We work on case studies. And well, in so doing that, we developed a master's program that we have graduating students. And like I was saying earlier, our first student passed away. And so it took a little while to generate and get back to doing the things that we were doing. But in the meantime, we're now developing collaborations with 2 more universities in Southeast Asia. So that was the news we put out earlier last night at dinner. So within our SEEDS program and our Women in Security program, Amber and I developed, well, we didn't realize what we were doing in the beginning. We thought we were just applying for grants, right? We didn't realize we were writing master's degrees within months of doing this program. And yet what we were doing was actually refining our organization, because now we're being asked to do a joint 2-year master's program with the University of England. So with that itself, we started out with just our 1-year fast track, like Matt and Seb are doing, and a few other students. And now we're going to start the 2 years. The 2 trainings that you're going to receive, yes. Her name was Lara, and Dennis. And the rest of you will get content. The first one in our seeds was climate change and its impacts, or more or less building resilience. What is resilience? Anybody? This is going to be interactive, so please don't just think you're going to sit there. So what is resilience? Yeah. And how many different regions are there here? There's online. You guys want to quick tell what country you're from briefly? You can go ahead and unmute.
UK.
Where's that, Angela? I can't hear you.
Maybe now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Spain.
You're from Spain. Good. Eugenia? Hi. You're muted.
Yes, Italian and Venezuelan. I've lived in Canada for quite a while, been in Europe as well, Dubai, and yes, here right now.
Okay. Ashraf? Are you able to talk, Ashraf, or do you want me to tell everybody where you're from? Ashraf is from Cairo. Anybody else? Is that it? We're recording. So from your different regions, how has climate impacted your region or country? Because when the first thing you talk about climate, people.
Weather, fire season.
Yeah. And I'm from Oregon, and I've been evacuated like last year, I think. My wife was at work, and we were called to evacuate just from the fire that was like 300 yards away from our place. Our neighbor was in Paradise, California. Her house was burnt down. The whole town was burnt down. And whether they think it's from PGE or not maintaining wires, there's a difference. And of course, depending on what political spectrum and misinformation you hear, there's also a difference in what people think about climate. So I'll tell you right now, as a conservative, I was so skeptical. I was like, all these years, I'm like, no, this is ridiculous. Until I started looking exactly what was going on. Why? So what do you think are some of the key causes of climate change? Pollution. Yeah. What was that? Deforestation. Yep. Increased population. Yeah. Yeah. Unless they're renewable. Okay. Anybody else? Just the earth itself, right? Time. Like El Nino or La Nina, those different. Right. 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 So that are some of those are some of the impacts that you yourself have experienced. So a little about our organization, and we've talked a little bit. We are a academic, non-biased, we're research and analysis driven organization. And so everything that our students do is based on what? Students. And peer-reviewed research, right? Not CNN, not what you see, or what you're going to hear from Ms. Amber's malign influence and disinformation, because it all ties together with what you think is climate change versus what is actually climate change. And we aim to show you that. So for this program, you're going to get the 30-minute, and for those that are paid, you're going to get the 8-hour to do your CPE credit. I'll have the content available for you. With the outline, there's an introduction like I'm giving, and there are 6 different modules. So today, the first 3 modules are all educational. The second 3 modules are all in practice exercise, meaning you're going to sit, you're going to do a risk assessment with your stakeholder, with your community, and then you're going to plan and then provide metrics and evaluation in order to see if those things are working. So in the seminar, we're going to just provide this overview for now, because 8 hours of climate change would just kill you, right? It would be unrealistic. So we talked about how it affects various sectors. It also affects agriculture, health, and the economy tremendously. And I've talked about us and our agenda for this. The epilogue is that we're leveraging our existence and resources to produce rigorous and impactful research. Our mission at the Institute is, through research and development, to advance international security through innovative, cutting-edge research. Now, our program that we designed was meant for State Department for different countries. Like it were you. We got it figured out in the US, right? We know exactly what is going on with climate change. We're selling solar panels, we're selling EVs, we're selling everything. But that doesn't work in other places. And that doesn't work when you're the person on the ground getting hit by the earthquake and you don't know where to turn to. And yes, since Hurricane Katrina, FEMA has done a remarkable job turning around, providing information and resources like the Red Cross. They have what happened. They have an app on the phone. You can follow through if there's an earthquake or a flood or something. So personally, throughout my life in the early 70s in Pennsylvania, I survived the flood of the Susquehanna, stuck on my second floor house for like 2 weeks. We had people bringing us food and stuff in a boat. That was one. And then the other one was the fire in Oregon this last year. Now, our team, which I stated, was myself and Amber, and then Haley Sadler, who's one of our research associates. She's a migration and policy specialist in Washington, D.C. She's a National Geographic explorer, photographer. So with our team, this is the team that Greece wants in order to bring all of this there, right? Because other countries don't have it figured out like we do. Just because we have to figure it out, don't mean we should just sit here and not do anything. Right? The greatest threat to our planet is the belief that someone else will save it. Now, understanding climate change, I'm not going to go through the scientific because I'm not a scientist. I'm a researcher. So there are probably many other people that can talk to you about what really causes climate change. So the quick, what we call down and dirty one is there's an ozone layer, and the amount of methane and carbon dioxide we put into the Earth's atmosphere continually stays here. It makes things hotter. And who said population? So population is a big player in it, but that's only a half of it. The other half is the 14 active volcanoes that are constantly spewing ash and carbon into the air. So that makes up 100% of what's happening in our ozone. It can't escape, just like the radiation from the sun can't come through the ozone here. It does, but the more, it's like hot air in a room. The more you talk, it's going to fill up with hot air more and more. Well, I'll try to stop. So with that, the two things that affect climate change are human security. I know Dr. Carr is going to talk about human security later. Protection and security, such as the biodiversity, ecosystems, and water. Water is the most crucial resource we have. I don't want to end up like Waterworld, Kevin Costner. Is that too old? I give my age away. It is a classic. That's where we're at. I think in different countries, different governments play around with leveraging their neighbors by cutting off water supply. Right? Not picking on China, but they did it to Vietnam with the river. It's completely dry. During the standoff between India and Pakistan, they cut off the water supply. Not to bag on India. So about our science, we want to be able to lead you with scientific evidence and to show you the increased concentration of greenhouse gases that's actually changing with it. Together we can share this with our climate models. So the impacts. We talked about personal impacts, and then there's agricultural. And I mean, climate change is expected to have a significant impact on water resources. So with rising temperatures, changes in precipitation patterns, the snowmageddon in Texas, there's the potential for both the increase and decreased water availability. We're talking. Impacts on agriculture are, most people don't understand the Farmer's Almanac, where there's an 80-year farming cycle. Like back in the 20s and 30s, we had the Dust Bowl. Why? Because our fields went fallow. It's happening all over it. The fields are going fallow. You have to let these fields, you have to rotate them. So that's why they do outsource to bring in wheat, grain, other things from other countries to provide also a global market. If you continually grow in the same plot, you're going to decrease the minerals. Hence, you're going to need the genetics to increase the food harvesting and stuff like that, which we're not trying to use genetics and modification in our food anymore. So, next is the impact on ecosystems. Now, there's a potential for change in the distribution of ecosystem, plants and animal species. That changes. Migration patterns. And I think one of the biggest things, somebody said the availability of resources in certain areas. How long has the migration into the UK been going on since the Sahel fields and trouble has been going on? Migration of people, or the migration like in Myanmar, who pushed the Rohingya out. There's 1 million people sitting on the border in Bangladesh because, not just because of their religion, but because of the overpopulation and scarcity of resources of the area that they were in. There's just nothing there for them, no jobs. So they migrate, just like they did from Northern Africa into Europe. Human health. Climate change is expected to have significant impacts on human health. Changes in temperature, precipitation. What did we just go through for 2 years? The manifestation, we try not to say that word. I didn't want to say it, but we went through this, and it had a profound effect on certain demographics of people. And the repercussions of what they tried to do have not been seen yet. No different than lead pipes at Lejeune or some of the places on Army bases. What we thought 20 years ago was good. What was that old saying of leisure suits causing cancer? It's long ago. So understanding the model that we've developed, the theoretical model, is it's based on vulnerability and adaptive capacity. Now, we want to just provide the introduction for that because it's all based on resilience. How resilient are people? That's a really Is everybody in the room resilient? If your house burnt down or if you experienced a traumatic injury or something like that, how resilient are you? Your families, how supportive do you have families that would help you through that? Right? Do you have a go bag packed? Seb, do you have a go bag packed? If something happens, you're ready to go? So we did. Our neighbor put the sprinkler on the roof and sat there in a lawn chair while the water was going on the roof, and then the bomber was just right down the street when it came right above. If it had not done what it did right then, fire would have just taken our development. So we were lucky. With the adaptive capacity, go bag, yes. We kind of have one, but it's for these. Adaptive capacity. So what is adaptive capacity? I think, Seb, you said it earlier. The ability to bounce back or be resilient. Yeah. And so what is adaptive capacity? And how is it important for building resilience to climate change? Because these things are going to keep happening. Snowmageddon's going to happen. Fires are going to happen. I think Calgary, how many fires are up there? 5 million acres have burned so far. They're already evacuating people in Canada. Yeah. And well, okay, we won't talk about eco-terrorism, right? And that used to be the way it is. When firemen were bored, somebody would go burn barns in the East Coast. That happened for like 2-3 years in a row. Fire department, volunteers were bored, so they would just pick an Amish barn and they would start burning them down, just so that they could have something to do. Yeah. It went on for years until they finally figured out who was doing it. It was a volunteer fire, eco-terrorism. But they got a lot of training out of that. So with the availability of resources, vulnerability, and adaptive capacity, knowledge is the most essential for adaptive capacity, and that includes scientific knowledge. Looking at climate change more and more and more, we discovered that, well, the science is actually simple. It's the malign influence and disinformation that's making it difficult for people to adapt to, whether it's EV, solar. And then the economy is, a lot of people can't afford it, right? And you can't just force it upon them by not selling oil. You just can't. Well, if you keep it simple, like climate change affects me and affects my community, how is it doing? So we go through that in the course of doing a vulnerability assessment. We do a vulnerability assessment and we look at sensitivity, how the population is sensitive to different exposures, and then how we can use adaptive capacity. So we use an exposure risk assessment that we created, and we use a vulnerability risk assessment that we created, because each population is different. Terrorism is different in every region. It's either state actor or non-state actor. It's either politically motivated or just ideologically motivated. It's no different for adaptive capacity and climate change. It's the same in different regions. The Middle East doesn't have tornadoes. The South does. So these patterns, the Middle East has dust storms. They have extreme heat. And extreme heat means what? People migrate. What's happening in South America? Extreme heat and terrorism. So these people are migrating. Plus they want better jobs. And that's been happening for a long time. Even when, oh wait, yes, Texas, Mexico lost to Texas, that's right. Big on Texas. With that. I know. So after doing the exposure risk assessment, vulnerability risk assessment, and the composite risk assessment, what do you think a risk assessment is? I know Sean knows what it is. I've done them for like 20 some years. You have to identify these things first. And with looking at climate change in certain areas, you have to first look at who's vulnerable. Who are the most vulnerable people? During Hurricane Katrina, I flew in 3 days after the hurricane. I was there before Hurricane Rita hit. The most vulnerable population in a hurricane are senior citizens. They were abandoned. We found hundreds of them in different homes and rescued them. Second most vulnerable population were women. The number of women that were sexually assaulted was astounding. 30,000 plus cases were identified during that hurricane. Why? Because the first thing the police did was fight the drug addict or the drug cartels down there. They were constantly, and then they left. They wanted to find their families and get out of there. So the whole city, if you've ever walked into a large city like Louisiana, Shreveport, it'd be empty. That's the most eerie feeling in the world. And then the only thing you're looking at is people at night that are robbing other people's houses of stuff. Where the drug addicts going to go? Where the convicts going to go? Even the prisons. So institutions play a crucial role. But if they're not involved in these climate assessments, how do they know? And like we said, in the United States, I guess they got it figured out, right? We have 4 different case studies that we're using within adaptive capacity. One is actually LA. So looking at the demographics of LA, looking at vulnerability, one of the key things that I discovered was there's 140 different languages spoken in this LA county, which means the population is 49% Mexican, Hispanic, 10% Chinese, and then the rest is white, but not just white American, Russian, whatever. But in those languages that are spoken, the LA climate action plan they have on their website is only in a few languages. How are the rest of those folks going to know what really to do? So that was one of the big things that I looked at, the gaps assessment. And if you look at other countries, there's many dialects in Europe too. So they're in the same boat. While the United Nations usually translates things in their climate action plan, well, what about Shreveport? What about LA? What about earthquake? Somebody online was commenting about the last 3 5.0s that LA had here in this last month. Oregon's had 40 earthquakes in the last couple months, right off the coast. Now, in the course, you're going to have different handouts that will tell you how to do these assessments, the adaptation measures to reduce the exposure and the vulnerability to each identified. And in the 9 regions internationally, and that's why we've developed it, it's not just for the United States, it's international. And so if you look at the 9 regions, it covers the most impacts and incidents that would happen in those regions. Like in Southeast Asia, you have typhoons, you have flooding nonstop. So how do you deal with those in the community? And then how do you deal with those? Nobody's doing the adaptive capacity strategies and the risk assessment. You'll see, like one example we did use is, remember the soccer team that was isolated inside the cave? They sent in the special forces. I think it was Taiwanese. Thailand, yeah. And how many days were they? They didn't have a really good plan for the flooding, which meant at any given time. It happens in Arizona, right? Floods in Arizona, especially in those wadis. They're brutal. They wash people away. So within the course, you'll have these different risk assessments to do and learn about, and you can actually teach other people to do them. And then for the full course, you'll have an examination to get your certification for your CPE hours. And I'm not going to go through all of the rest of this, but that is my presentation on building resilience, climate change. Any questions?
All right, thank you, everyone. Okay, so I'm very passionate about this topic. I could go on for a full 8 hours without missing a beat, but I only got 30 minutes and I'll try not to run out of tangent. So, as you know, we're here for our Steve's program, but you already know all that, so let's get to the good stuff. So today I'm going to talk about countering malign influence and misinformation. Now, this is with the CPE credit, is the 8-hour course, which we're going to be introducing today. But this is all much more so than TAWS, much more academically based. So I don't have to go through how to do forms and things like that. Rather, it's more about critical thinking and how do we analyze the information that we are absorbing. So what is malign information, right? We're going to talk about what it is, how to tell the difference between what is a malign influence, what is disinformation, what is misinformation, because if you know me for any amount of time, you will hear me say words matter, because they do. Because the difference between misinformation and disinformation is huge, but the words are often used interchangeably, incorrectly. So when we're talking about how do we identify and work with and analyze the information that we're coming up against, have to know the difference. So you know what you're looking for, you know how to count. So that's, excuse me. So that's what we're going to be talking about today in the context as well of epistemic injustice, because this is where we're going to see it a lot within our community as well as in the security industry. So through this, we're going to, in this program, this class, this 8-hour CPE for today, and the SEEDS program at large, which will be given to state departments in other countries. These are the main sources that we're going to be looking at. Again, definitions, words matter. What is epistemic justice? How does disinformation spread? What is problematic influence? What makes it problematic? How do we fact check? How do we make sure what we're reading is correct? How do we assess that information that we are absorbing? News sources come in all different shapes and sizes. How do we know the good from the bad? And then critical thinking. How do we actually think about the information that we are absorbing? So with our introduction to what malign influence is. So really what we're talking about, we're really delving into the subject of epistemic injustice and what that profound impact is that it has on the spread of disinformation. So our goal here today for this is to really provide a comprehensive understanding of what contributes to disseminating misleading information. Why is it done? What are the impacts and implications of that misinformation? So I'm going to kind of get to the good stuff, the meaty stuff, which is the definition, because after all, words matter. So when we're talking about malign influence, this is deliberate false information that is being spread. And the word here is intent. The intent is to sow discord. They want to confuse. Individuals who provide malign information, they want to confuse you. They want you to believe something that isn't true. They want you to believe that the sky is green. They want you to believe that carrots are purple. We know that empirically that is incorrect, but the more they say it, the more confused you're going to get, and the more you're going to start to question, what do I know is real? So malign influence is that deliberate attempt to manipulate and undermine. So these comes in all shapes and sizes. Propaganda, my favorite personally, but it comes in cyber attacks and espionage. It can come in economic coercion and sanctions. What do we consider support for terrorism? How do we define terrorism? What are the differences between proxy wars, hybrid wars, traditional wars? All of these terms can get diluted, confused, mashed up together so that you, as an individual absorbing this information, stands there and go, what does that mean? That's the purpose of a malign influence. They want to confuse you. So what is disinformation? Disinformation is me telling you the sky is green. I'm telling you that. I know it's false. Initially, you think it's false, but the more I say it, the more I get everybody else to say it, the more you're going to question it. My intention is to initiate chaos. My intention is to sow that discord so that you're going to have competing interests fighting against each other. Because the more you're fighting against each other, the more you're not paying attention to me and what I really want to do, which is whatever I want to do in the background. That is disinformation. It is that intentional, I'm going to tell you the wrong information, and I want to tell you that wrong information. So this can come in, again, it comes in many different ways. We see it all the time. When we talk about election interference, which most of us are in the US, we heard about it a lot during the last presidential election. But what does that mean? The more information you have, the more consistently you hear it, the more you start to believe it. The individuals who are putting out that disinformation want you to believe something that isn't true. They want it to become that mantra. They want it to become familiar. That's one of the biggest ways that disinformation spreads, is becoming familiar. And once I've put my intention to confuse you out there, then we're going to get to misinformation. I'm totally going on now. But misinformation is, now that I've told you the sky is, where I say green, the sky is green, right? Now everybody here is going to say, the sky is green, the sky is green, the sky is green. I put it on Facebook, the sky is green. The more you share it, the more you're going to say, yeah, the sky is green. Let me forward that post. Let me retweet that tweet. Now that's misinformation. I'm telling you something that is false. You are taking that to be true and you are spreading it. Social media is the fastest way that misinformation spreads. Fastest. Blink of an eye. My one intentionally confusing, incorrect, false comment is now in millions of hands. The more you share it, the more you spread it. And now the easiest way to differentiate disinformation from misinformation. Misinformation is a mistake. It's not done intentionally, but that is how disinformation spreads. And individuals who use disinformation know exactly how to do it. I'm going to tell you something, you're going to tell 10 friends, that person's going to tell 10 friends, and it becomes a game of telephone. What I initially said is turned around, twisted, absorbed, interpreted differently, and now I've sown confusion. Now nobody knows what color the sky is because everybody has a different reason, everybody has a different experience, everybody has absorbed that information differently and has spread it. The election was rigged. But that becomes the mantra, and you hear it and you hear it and you hear it. But what does that do? What does that mean? When we're talking about the larger scale of misinformation, it has such dramatic implications. When we're talking about a room, or when we are talking about a government, a state, and you have misinformation being thrown out there, you have your populace who is now divided what color the sky is. They can't even agree on what the definition of color is anymore, right? Like we had a conversation about sweaters last night. We couldn't agree, but it's the same principle. There's no hard line. A is A, B is B, sky is blue, grass is green. So that misinformation comes, and now everybody's confused. Everybody has a different set of definitions. So when your authority figure, your president, your whatever, comes up and says, I'm telling you, the sky is blue, everybody's gonna go, no, it's not. No, it's not. Because I heard that it was green. I know the sky is green. So that undermines the legitimacy of what that authority figure is telling you. And it makes it that much harder to get true, accurate information to your populace. We saw this during the COVID pandemic, right? Misinformation everywhere. So when you have your World Health Organization leaders, when you have your public health leaders coming out to you saying, this is how COVID spreads, this is how you mitigate risk, this is what you need to do to stay safe. Nobody believed them because the misinformation was already out there. The confusion was already out there. So now your authority figure has to work twice as hard because now they not only have to dispel the wrong, false information that was intentionally spread, now they have to convince you of the right information. And that is dangerous. Once you have a state that is so conflicted between misinformation, disinformation, and all of those malign influences that are coming in because they want you confused, that legitimacy issue in your own state now affects your international relations. So this has huge, huge implications when you're talking about it on a wide scale. You can take it down to a micro level and look at it in a classroom. You're going to have the same issues, just blown up with far bigger stakes, right? Like way out here. Okay, epistemic injustice. So when we're talking about misinformation, disinformation, and malign influences and epistemic injustice, this is when we're talking about groups that are marginalized. Where are their voices? Women in security, we are a marginalized group, right? We have to work twice as hard to be heard half as much, right? That is the same with all of these other individual groups that are consistently marginalized. The more you have misinformation being spread out, the more you have disinformation intentionally being put out there, and all of these malign influences that want you confused, they want to keep these marginalized individuals, groups down because it conflicts with what their interests are. So when we're looking at social prejudices, social constructs of community, of communication, this is where misinformation is super dangerous because you're not going to know what's up, what's down, and who to trust. So it becomes harder when we go back to our COVID example. Your public health, your medical professionals, all the people that were telling you, this is how COVID spreads, this is what you need to do to mitigate it, they were marginalized, they were shut down by the misinformation that is being sent out there because they don't want to hear that. So again, they have to work twice as hard to be heard half as much. So we have our our vaccine movement. That was my example that I used earlier. But when we're talking about climate change and Todd's presentation, again, we're talking about changes that are happening. But again, all of this disinformation, this misinformation, which we are consistently taking and absorbing, how do we know what to do? How do we know what's right? How do we know what are the right steps to take in order to combat climate change in any way that we are capable of doing? That's how we have to dispel all of this misinformation that is being spread out there. If we go back to a more academic, historical sense, when we're talking about indigenous knowledge, we in the United States, take it as an example, we have taken a society and grown a society in a place where people have lived before the common society, and they were sustainable. But when a new society comes in, they go, I got this. Don't worry about it. I don't really care what you guys were doing before. I'm going to do it this way. But then what happens is we're not taking into account their knowledge. We're not taking into account their experience. We are not taking into account all of that valuable information that they can present to us, their factual, lived knowledge. And we dispel this information because we got it. So that happens when we don't take into account real knowledge based on the misinformation that we're being bombarded with. So how do we identify that problematic influence, right? How do we know that doesn't sound right? This is not right. I need to do some more research, right? Dominance. If you have a group of people talking and one person talks the whole time, they're not letting anybody speak. They're not allowing different perspectives to penetrate that conversation. They're not allowing questions about their line of thought because they're going to talk and you're going to listen, and that's going to be that. When you're talking about groupthink, we're all in a conversation and we're more concerned making sure everybody's okay, everybody's on the same page. We're not allowing that conflict of opinion. We're not having a debate or placating. Nobody's saying the real issue. Therefore, you're not getting the whole story. You're not getting the real information, right? You're not getting the meat of what you're trying to talk about. Confirmation bias. I'm only going to read this newspaper because they only talk about what I know is true. You're only going to seek out information which validates your already held stance on whatever topic that you're thinking about. If you don't allow yourself to have different sources of information, your opinions and perceptions are never going to change because you're only willing to accept information that confirms your original bias. Social pressure. I'm going to disagree with you, but only if it doesn't make you too uncomfortable, right? Because I don't want to be seen as the odd man out. Ooh, I don't know what she's talking about. No, you're going to conform your talk. You're going to conform your line of thinking. You're going to conform your line of questioning to fit the mood of the group that you're in. Again, it's not allowing critical thought. It's not allowing you to have any conflicting opinions that could actually change somebody's perception about something that's incorrect. Your biased information. Again, we all have biases. We all have unconscious biases. But a part of being an academic, a part of being a well-rounded individual is being able to recognize those biases and seek outside information. You know what? I had a bad lived experience, but that doesn't mean that everything from that experience is bad. I need to allow more information. And if you don't do that, you're only going to find biased information. And then your persuasive language. Ooh, this is a big one. You're going to love this one in politics. They use all the trigger words because they want you to think with your emotions. Persuasive language is such a big way to spread that disinformation, that misinformation, because they're going to use those trigger words that are going to make you upset or make you kind of sad, or those commercials with like the hurt puppies, right? They're playing on your emotion. They're using the trigger words because they want you to do something that they want you to do, right? They're not going to tell you, not to say that any of those organizations are bad, but they're not going to tell you, if you send me $20, 18 of those dollars are going to administrative costs and $2 are going to puppies, right? They're not going to tell you that because then you're not going to send them $20. They're only going to tell you your money is going to help puppies. And then they're going to show you a sad puppy. And then you're going to send them $20. That's persuasive language. That's how they get you to do what you want because you're not thinking critically, you're thinking emotionally. So how do we know? How do we know? What do we do? Now that we have all this information, what do we do with it, right? How do we move forward? How do we analyze it? Well, there's fact checking, right? I am such a huge fan of fact checking. Every time something big happens, the first thing I want to do is I want to fact check. I want to fact check that speech. I want to fact check that article because I want to know that didn't sound right, but I want to double check what it was that they said and what does it really mean? Because if I'm using my persuasive language, I can say something that is technically true, but not really. And you're not going to know that unless you fact check. You're going to look into what they're saying. Look at the sources that they are using and look at the analysis by people in that field. who know what they're talking about, probably more than the person who gave the speech that you're fact checking. Yes.
So the problem I think we have is you're looking at the experts. They are not in agreement, right? They're consistent, and so it's very, very difficult to find anything in the realm of anything where there's consistent. And if you start going, from one to another, you're not going anywhere. You're going to have to make a call. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I would say that depends on what you're looking at. Because if you're talking about something in the social sciences, right, you're going to have different opinions, and every expert is going to have slight variation on the same thing, right? You're not going to get consistency when we're talking about social sciences. Just like there's no, agreed upon definition of terrorism. There are as many definitions as there are agencies in the world, countries in the world, because each definition serves its own purpose. So how do we know what that purpose is? Well, you got to fact check. What is the purpose of this person? Is this expert that's talking about whatever? What is their goal, right? How much can I trust them based on what I'm really trying to find out, right? If we're talking about something that's a little bit more rigid, right? Like going back to our vaccine example, I'm going to trust a infectious disease expert more than another type of doctor, right? They're both experts. They are both renowned. They can have identical whatevers, but because one is talking about the specific thing that I'm looking for, I'm going to trust that expert over this expert over here.
Sure, that's different.
Read them both. What makes more sense? But that's where you go. You have to figure out what you want to accept and what you don't. You're never going to find two experts that agree on absolutely everything. You're not going to find two people that agree on everything. Right. Exactly. So when we're talking about these different experts, how do we differentiate? How do we determine who I'm going to trust versus who I'm not going to trust? Well, then you have all these other options here. Is this person, does this person work for the public? Does this person work privately? They may have different motivations for expressing certain opinions. I don't know. We have to find out. And that's why we look at our source verification. Are they, again, where is that information publicized? How much do I trust that publication? And this comes from, again, you have to allow yourself to go outside of our comfort zone and not just log on to the CNN or the New York Times or the whatever, right? You have to find outside organizations that you can look into. And you know what? Sometimes you're going to go, this looks good. And you're going to read it and you're going to go, no, never mind. I'm not going to trust that source anymore. Because I know that their information is not consistent with everything else that I'm seeing. And then that also falls into what is our contextualization, right? How is this information being presented? Is it being presented as straight facts, a list of 1 to 10 things you need to know about buying shoes, right? You have 1 through 10. Those are just facts. There's no real contextualization compared to a person giving a talk about shoes, right? And using a trivial example kind of exemplifies the difference in the type of information that you're being given. If I'm just going to give you a 1 through 10, I don't really have any motivation to tell you anything, right? Other than what those facts are. But if I'm talking to you about shoes and I want you to buy a certain type of shoe or a certain brand of shoe, I'm going to talk more about that while hushing down the other dissenting sides that go against what I'm trying to tell you. So you have to look at the information itself and what is it packaged in. That's going to tell you. You're never going to know for certain 100% whether it's right, whether it's wrong. You just got to keep going. And down the rabbit hole you go. Eventually you'll climb out, hopefully. It'll all be good. So when we're looking at the assessment of those ways in which we can check that information, where is their expertise coming from? Who has that knowledge? Are they trustworthy? Do I trust them? And trustworthiness, reliability are very personal things. Because you can go back to a news source consistently over time. I trust CNN. I trust the New York Times. I trust this news anchor, right? Because they're familiar. You've received accurate information from them before, so you're more willing to take that. Versus when you're confronted with a story and you're like, I don't really trust that from a new news source. You're going to trust your old reliable more than that one. But then when something happens and your normally reliable news source then tells you something you know is false, or you prove what they've said is false, now that reliability and that trustworthiness of that previously reliable source, now that's on shaky ground. How do I always trust the same people? You can't. So you have to consistently expand your research and look into other things so that you can always get different sides to the same story. That's how you're going to find out all this information that all you people send me about the sky being green, that was false. I finally figured out that the sky is blue because I went out of my comfort zone and I found new sources of information where there were experts talking about how the sky is blue. I trusted the news source in which that information came to me from. And they were open and they were clear. There wasn't any vagueness. There wasn't any, oh yeah, the sky is really blue, but don't worry about this, information over here. The sky is just really blue. No, there was transparency in the information that they were sharing. That's how I know that what I'm looking at is real information, not just what has been reinforced, not just what is told to you over and over and over again, and then spread. And then so when we're looking at critical thinking, sorry, I should have made that a darker color. When we're looking at critical thinking, that's the final part of this course, is how are we going to really look at these sources, look at this information that is being sent. The Socratic questioning is probing questions, right? It's like a lawyer setting you up to confess on the stand, right? They're going to ask you little questions and they're going to lead you down the path to what they know is true. So you just have to keep asking those little questions. And the more you follow, the more you're going to get to the truth of the information, the truth of whatever you're asking about, are those probing little questions. You have to analyze their arguments, right? Camp B says this, Camp A says that. Why are they saying this? What is the outcome of them saying this versus the other? You have to look at both sides of the argument and decide, why are they citing the things that they're citing to support their claim? That's what you have to look at. And then decide which one makes more sense. Which one is better? Which one fits more with the reality of what I'm seeing, right? And of course, evaluating your sources, you always have to look at where the sources came from. How do you know that? Who told you that? Where did you read that, right? That's why every time you read an academic book, it has 30 pages of references because they're telling you, this is where I got the information from. I didn't just make it up. I got it from this list of doctors who are super smart and they're experts in this particular field. That's where I'm getting this information from. That's why I'm sharing it. If you don't have those sources to back it up, I'm really not going to trust what you're telling me, especially if it goes against what I perceive to be true. If I'm consistently being told misinformation, disinformation, if I am being influenced by those malign forces that want me confused, I'm going to have a harder time trusting new information that contradicts that. But if that new information, which is contradicting what I'm consistently being bombarded with, I'm going to trust the information that has the experts, that has the sources, versus one that does not have those sources. That's why you always gotta look at your sources, and then evaluating sources twice. Same difference. You really just have to look at your sources. Where is that information coming from, and what colors those perspectives, right? Just like we all have our own biases, our conscious and unconscious biases. What is coloring that person's expertise? Do I know? Can I know? All just questions to keep in mind as you're going through, you're countering that malign influence, right? And then just a thank you, that this is really what we are looking at. We are looking at what is a malign influence, misinformation, disinformation, and what are those impacts? Because if we're talking about security in itself, misinformation is a big deal, right? We want the truth, but at the same time, we all know there are outside factors that don't want us to know the truth. They want that information to be diluted. They want that information to be false. They want to push a narrative, and you have to say, that doesn't sound right. How am I going to figure out what's true? So that's a very brief introduction into this course. Again, the 8-hour class, the CPE one, goes more into detail into each of these sections, as well as it has knowledge check questions, some different critical thinking exercises, taking a scenario and then learning how to deconstruct an argument, and how do you compare sources? How do you find out what's true? So that is my very brief go into my class on malign influence. Mhm.
Went down the road. Because and that maybe there's other perspectives of
Mhm. There's that's going to be varied, and that's like a whole other one. But if you're talking about, it really depends on if you're having a one-on-one conversation with somebody. It's a lot easier to say, why do you think that? Where did you get that information? Right? It's a lot easier to kind of bring them around the corner to say, maybe you should consider this article or this book because it offers a different perspective. If you're in a group, that's much harder to do, especially if you're in a group that already holds something so fiercely as being true. How do you break into that? Right. If you're trying to break into a group of people that really, really believe that the election is rigged, they're not going to be so easily persuaded by, oh, but look, Georgia really did have this number of many votes, or whatever that fact is. They're not going to take that information because it's been consistently said over and over and over again that the election is rigged. So the best way to do it, especially on a large scale, and this is very hard to do, but you would have to consistently push out real, true, factual information, because you're going to hear it. You hear it on the news, right? When the news is on the TV, but you're over here doing dishes and you kind of listen and you hear it. And then you're driving in your car and you hear it again on the radio. And then you're in the grocery store and you hear the couple talking about it in the line behind you, right? That information is consistently being pushed out to you, and often on a passive basis. We absorb information on a passive basis much more than we do on an active basis. It's just all the little sources. So you have to consistently push out true and accurate information for it to happen in all of those tiny instances, so that when you do have that conversation with somebody, you're like, well, yeah, I heard that. I heard the lady behind me talking about that. I heard that on the radio. So you already have that foundation of it being true rather than not true, and then having to work twice as hard to get half as much. Malign influence and misinformation. Yeah. Nice plug. Mhm.
Of how, like, writing, we have information and
Mhm.
from educate of women specifically, I think there's an answer to these debates of these, like the, you know, like the idea of the and then you think that like just spreading real information is not what's happening is culture that is a debate and is allowing for information to happen.
It's going to sound counterintuitive, but I'm going to say yes. But here's why. Because the more you spread that true and accurate information, the more you have discussions, the more you bring that marginalized community to the forefront to share not only factual, you know, empirically true evidence, but that lived experience, right? That the more you bring that to the forefront, the more it becomes mainstream, the easier it is for people to digest, right? Because if you're women in general, right? Just take a very basic example of a marginalized community, women of color not being believed when they go to the doctor. I'm in pain. It's not that bad. I need something. I'm in pain. Here's an Advil, right? The more you bring that lived experience to the forefront, the more you're going to be able to impact a positive change where that doctor is a very simple example, like, again, not getting into the specifics, but you're going to have that doctor say, I'm hearing more and more that this is true. So maybe I need to take it as being true. So is it that simple? No. Is it easy? No. Because you have to break through and work twice as hard to get heard half as much. But eventually, when you do, and our theme for this weekend is breaking down barriers, right? The more you beat on that wall, the more you break down that barrier, the more information that can come through, right? Because as we have, you know, especially women, when you have titans, women, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, right? She was so out of whack in her time. People were like, no way a woman can do this. No way she has a marriage where the man takes care of the children half the time, right? She broke down that wall, but she normalized it. So it made it easier for others in that community to accept that as being real and true and effective, right? But when all that information first came out, that's not true. She can't do that. No. But the more you normalize it, the more you talk about it, the more you bring that lived experience to the forefront, the more it will be accepted. And the more it will impact change. Is it easy? No. Is it fast? No. But it will happen eventually. Yes. Yep. Mhm. Yep.
What do you do? Policy.
Mhm. Yeah. Yes. Mhm. Yes. And I would say the biggest proponent, I would say, is accountability, right? And that's going to be a lot harder to inflict on individuals on an individual basis. You know, the little madman on Twitter, that guy's going to be really hard to regulate. But when you have especially elected officials, they need to be held accountable for what they say. Because again, even if they're taking something as being true and spreading it, they're spreading misinformation. Once they are confronted with that, there has to be some type of accountability, right? They have to be able to stand up and say, you know what, I got this information, turned out it was incorrect. This is the correct information. And that is accountability. When you're talking about on a very small scale about social media in general, companies, right? They need to have that accountability as well, because it's just insane what people say online, because they're spreading that information. And then once they're confronted with the true information, they double down, right? They're going to double down and they're going to say, that's not true, that's not true, that's not true. So we have to initiate some type of accountability. How to do that? I don't know. Yes. So, yes. Yes. Exactly. Because that's the malign influence and they want to sow discord. We connected it all. It was so great. The whole big circle. But that's exactly the point, right? They knew that that image was fake. I'm going to send it out anyway. Joe Schmo over here is like, I'm going to do this. But I don't know that it's fake. So there has to be that balance, right? And that's the difference between disinformation and misinformation. They are not the same wordsmith. So, thank you.
Okay, so I'd like to thank Ms. Amber Quindo for her presentation on malign influence and misinformation. Next up is Dr. Sean Carr, Physical Security Specialist, and his presentation, A Critical Role in Current Threats with Physical Security. He'll be accompanied by Stephanie Prentice.
Why is physical security so important? And one of the tricky things is when we talk about physical security, depending who you ask, they're like, oh, it's IT. Correct, in a way. Physical security is within the IT world, your firewalls, your domain. But we're not talking about that today. We're talking about your actual physical security assets that you protect. Barriers, walls, fences, cameras, access control, security operations. There is a plethora of information data that you need to protect yourselves, your organization, or even your university campus. Now, why I say that is because of the threats. Our threats throughout the world, because of globalization, terrorism, criminal activity, has increased significantly. And it's very hard with that, especially coming out of a global pandemic. It was on the rise. So how do you protect your personnel? How do you protect your assets? How do you protect your company, your students, your family? And you do that with physical security. And as the threats increase, we as security professionals, practitioners, have to be smart. We have to get ahead of the threat, which is very hard. I know it's a cliche, but it's very hard. It's what we have to do because they're doing it at a rapid pace, just like us. Here's some of the threats that are out there. Internal threats. Everybody's heard about that. Industrial espionage. Spies. They're huge, and it's happened more. Social media influence. They fall in that internal threat category. Because you may not like your boss. I saw what you told me. It's okay. Take it down. Well, that could be an internal threat. That's stuff that we have to worry about. Cyber threats. That's huge. We know the increase of cyber threats. With that, AI. With that, quantum computing is going to change the difference and change the world for security. It's huge. Our natural threats. We've heard about that throughout so far this morning. Mr. Price is going through wildfires that affected his natural disaster. We heard about flooding, natural disaster. We heard about climate change, natural threats. How do you prepare those for your organization? Building walls, barriers. How do you do all What impact is climate change going to have as a threat? Oh, wow, wait a minute. Change is a threat. What is that threat going to do for your physical security? And how do you change or act? Because we have to be maintained, sustained, included. Assessing risk levels. What risk level are we assessing? Is it climate? Is it cyber? Is it AI? Is it industrial espionage? Is it rioting? Is it criminals? Is it terrorism? Assessing your risks or assessing your threats are going to help better prepare you on what amount of funding you're going to have to spend on it. And that's why we have that. Now, as physical security professionals, we have a plethora of ideas of what we have to do. Pending if you're academic, corporate, military, where do you fall as security professionals on what your mission is or what your vision is? And there's many, as you can see, that are out there. Do you just want to respond? Do you detect and respond? Where do you fall in the categories for where you want to go on the level of security for your assets, for your personnel, for your data? And that's a question you as security professionals have to ask yourself. Because that's now, what makes it so critical is the difference of who you're asking. Because we all have different views. Some of us have experience through education. Some of us have experience through combat, through working through the workforce, working our way up. Some of us have experience as a male, making decisions based on perspective that we know. Some of us have views and opinions as a female, which may be better. Working together and having teams to find out where you need to be for physical security. Having a different opinion, having a different view of where you're going to be for your security program has to be articulated not only to your leadership, but amongst your other fellow or your other security professionals that are out there. Right? With these methodologies, I want to bring this up. If there's anybody here in the room virtually, how many HR individuals are there? We have a few raised hands. Understanding security does not bring in a revenue stream for your corporation, or your campus, your university. It is hard to articulate keeping those programs alive. It is up to you and us as security professionals to bridge that gap, because we're always the first one to get cut. It's basic research. When money's not flowing in or you don't have a revenue stream, it's hard to articulate, I need another campus. I need a new access control. We need a new barrier. We need armed guards. As we know, some of our retail corporations out there are feeling that pain right now with some of the new legislative laws that are in place. So we have to be worried about this methodology. We have to be worried about who creates this methodology. Not saying anything's wrong. But as we talked about earlier, find the professionals, find the experts, do the research, find out what's going to work best for you. Because once you have the right methodology, you can start your plan of attack that you need to for your physical security once you need. So next what we're going to talk about is just a few of the silos within physical security. And if you have questions, experiences, please come up. Amber has a computer, let us know. First one, access control. I love this one. Love this one. There's many companies I talk to, it's like, I want the new biometrics, eye scan, handprint, front door, nobody can get in, stuff on our phone. Fantastic. $1.5 million to get you all set up. With a $500,000 maintenance fee for the server and everything. And it's kind of like, what? Oh, also you have to build a compartment because you're in Oregon and rains all the time, I can't get wet. Or no, we're in Arizona, it's always hot, 110 degrees, that's not gonna work, it has to be an air conditioned place. It is quite common to start defining technology that access control can be a basic person checking IDs. It could be a key fob. It can be a key. It could be anything you decide it to be, depending where you're at. Everywhere in the world does not have advanced technology. Biometrics not have advanced technology on retinal. So you have to find what best access control you need and what level for your asset. Schools are learning about this. They're learning about it in hard way because of active threats. Some corporations are learning about it because of the mass firing. What access control is going to benefit you and be smart with where you can maintain it. Turnstiles. Access control is just not about your front of the building. Access control starts out in a concentric circle at the farthest of your asset, at the farthest of your perimeter. It can be that unarmed or that armed guard checking ID, people coming in their vehicle. It could be a vehicle badge system. But it starts to the farthest away because as security professionals, we love that defense depth. We love that security depth. We love those concentric layers of security as we protect our assets, as we protect our business. Understanding access control, what you need, is key. Now, here's the issue. What we as security professionals take on access control is hard for what the client or what your leadership wants. Do we want fences and walls around our schools and campuses? We want to look like no castles. We want to look like castles. What does that do to the mental resiliency, as we talked about earlier, of those students? Well, an example of that, maybe we don't want that. But we put bushes, rocks, trees, set fence, crime prevention through environmental design, that can help with the access. We call it corporate beautification. Security in plain sight. That can help with the dynamic of bringing in that feeling that I want to work with. So I ask right now, how many people want to work with this? Messes with fences, razor tape, security cameras, access control. After a while, it starts to mess. Now, think of you being a corporate, what that's going to do from your clients that you're trying to bring in. That funding stream you're trying to bring in. Those students you're trying to bring in. It's quite large what you do when it comes to access. A great segue is drones, which is the kind of perimeter security. Advanced technology is awesome, right? Drones are becoming the future. Hear about them in Ukraine, hear about them in war, hear about them in real estate all the time. Because they're taking the real estate. We hear about them in emergency management, FEMA, floodplain map, disaster recovery. Drones are becoming a very popular technology across the spectrum, good and bad. How does that affect your perimeter security? What do you do for a drone? Do you have anti-drone? What type of perimeter security are you going to have? Are we going to build green nets 100 feet high? Are you going to build a fence? Are you going to use cameras? What can you do? And as security professionals, we have to think about it. We have to think in the gray area. I like calling it purple, but we have to think of the purple area of what's coming. Because the threats are doing that already. Now, perimeter security. We talked a little bit about sex ed. What do you use as perimeter security? How many here love seeing giant walls or the chain link fence? Chain link fence with razor tape on. How do you feel if you see that around a corporation? How do you feel if you see that around a school? Do I have any parents in here? Security professionals. and that, oh, perfect. As a security professional, it's beautiful. Give me that 6 foot chain. but we're good. Try and get in my school. But as a parent, like, what do you feel? Why? Why do you feel scared?
Because it's a manifestation of threat that you just don't want to see.
There's no threat there. I'm protecting your kid. I have chain link fence. I have camera. We're good. Why are you in fear? I made it safe. There's many differences out there. And how as we, as security professionals, can use a dynamic of our environment to make sure we can still be safe, still be secure, but do it in an actual way where we do not cause fear and chaos. Our foundational approach, many of you in here are security practitioners. Our foundation has been laid throughout years of best practice. The problem with that is barriers, walls, fences. We need to change our mindset. How do we do not making our world to a system of walls, of fences, of cameras? Your perimeter security is key on that. But you have to think of what your threats are. And with that, you have to do your assessment, to understand what truly you need. That's hard. Talked about money earlier, didn't we? We need money for physical security research. Yes, as a security professional, do I want a fence? I believe it. Do I want hydraulic barriers? Oh yeah. Do I want cameras everywhere? Yes. Do I want biometrics, retina scans? Oh yeah. Tell them all this coming out every day. This is great. You got this. Metal detector. Yes. Outstanding. Let's see what that bill is. Ooh. I want to see it. How do you explain to your leadership? This is what makes you safe.
Not even that, but even like the normal citizen who's not in security, they're gonna look at that completely different than we will. So I think even the business side, even seeing the money side of it, them going, wait a minute, but we also have these parents, they may be too scared to bring their kid to the school now, especially when we're talking about like private. Well, no, I don't take them there anymore because it looks like a jail.
Colleges or universities. Let's combine these. Everybody, most people that came to this, or everybody in the world has at least flown once, correct? Not throwing anything against an organization, not trying to throw shade at all. Very neutral. We're in the virtual room in customer trust. How do y'all feel about PSA?
They're my favorite.
It's amazing the responses I get. Do you agree with it? Their outer perimeter access. You have to go through the city. What do you have to do? Shoes off, electronics out. So pretty much almost you go through the X-ray scan and you don't. What are they seeing? How do you feel with that? Basic. They're making a mistake.
I'm not worried about the aftermath. After meeting, baggage claiming area.
We talked about it, but you're in their perimeter security. And I bring up TSA because, again, the mixed feelings of what has happened after 9/11 here in the U.S. Flying completely changed. The dynamic of flying changed. There are case studies on that. How did that make most of the American population feel? Oh, they hated it. Evasive. Why am I being searched? Why are you touching me? Why are you going through all my bags? Why do I have to go through this extra?
Okay.
Where's my bag going? You open your bag, you got the little slip in there. Your bag is in it. How's that? Violating. Why? I'm your security professional. I'm making you safe. Bring this up as we talk through is because these are items, issues, incidents that you have to think about. If you are representing a campus, corporate, military, these are things you have to think about on your process. which goes into our next one, security operations. Do you want those armed guards? I hear some stickers out there. It's pretty good. Feeling it. Do you want armed guards? Do you want unarmed guards? Do you have a control center monitoring everybody coming in that badge system that you want them so bad to buy that lets you know who comes in and comes out? What are your processes and procedures that you want to do? Do you have written processes and procedures? What are you going to do in response? And what threat is it? 85% of the organizations out there have a written SOP, not saying when it wasn't written, but have guidance that do not cover current threats against you. And to tie into that, they do not have a contingency, crisis, or emergency plan of action written into that security operation. Now, I understand this. I've debated this with some fellow researchers. I like you're wrong. I said, really? And not to touch, and please let me know if it does. I want to talk about some school shootings. Active threat, shooting in the school. What do we hear about? What do we hear about in active action reports? What was wrong? What delayed? What they didn't do? What they didn't have? Fall back on security operations. Plan. Write your procedures. Write your processes. Cover everything. We talked about those threats earlier. How many of you right now within your organizations or campuses or online virtually, how many of you within your security operations have natural disasters and responsibility? One. Two. I understand you do. You do. Two. Something to think about. We talked about climate change. What do you do, say, here in California? Wildfires have been pressing a lot lately. What do? What's your security operations? What do you have written down? This is where we're failing as security professionals, but we, as a collective group, can be better at. We can do the research. We can help get that foundation to make the right processes that fit within your organization. At a college campus, do we need heavily armed guards walking around? How would that make you feel? Probably good. Probably really good. Or a school. Your corporate industries, the buildings you work in and go to every day. If you saw heavily armed individuals walking around every single day, how would that make you feel? Does that make you safe? Would you feel safe?
Yeah, I
All
was
right. Awesome. You
I
said
was
no.
thinking, yeah, occasionally I do Washington, and they tried to do guards in the metro that were heavily armed and like the internet went crazy because they were like, what's going on? And so everyone was avoiding the metro as a result. They were not feeling safe. Because if you don't know why they were put there in the first place, it's difficult to understand how you should behave too. Should I be feeling safe being on the metro with someone that is wearing like weapons like that? Not the so I would not feel like personally I would not feel safe. I would avoid the space. And so it's crazy the opposite. It's not the most.
If you were retail shopping, you saw that.
Yeah.
I think the issue is, and every organization that I'm in contact with fails to recognize the importance of preemptively addressing those issues, communication, long before it happens. As you can put, even when we at YDR, we started sending some of our guys in the airport with carbines, everything. That was the result of years ago. Anyways, long story short, there has to be a strategy around communicating that and doing so properly. Precisely, and that's a part of it. The problem is everybody has the security operation in mind as the hands and feet, not what needs to be done to prepare people for that. And even having a little booth at the side saying, hey guys, just so you know, this is what's going to happen here, this is where it's happening. We've had an increase in this and that and the second piece of this is what isn't happening. It's very hard to quantify what isn't happening. Have you done your job right? Nothing happened. Like you don't know. Like you can't quantify that. So you have to have a reasonable risk assessment attached to this that takes into totality of the circumstances. What is your cost benefit? You have to communicate it. That if you can't communicate it, you don't have it. So then don't do it.
Perfect. Well spoken. For us, if we have a boring day, we had a great day.
Exactly.
Good morning, everybody. And we will put me back out and bother and watch it. Come up there here. These things that get trapped and all the no, that's perfect. The geographical location where you're at, what resources you have, just with physical security, this is just a small portion. When we start talking about human security, the 7 silos within that, the geographical location is very key and dynamic of what is accepted. We're going to talk about culture, society tomorrow. Fabulous point though, because it is depending on what culture, what society, where you're at, what people are so used to. For example, even here or globally, I don't like using it, but the pandemic, did it not change all of our cultures and safety in our whole society? You know, if you went back to say a retail store or a restaurant, everybody had the plastic visors. It changed. At first, as a society, we're kind of like, dude, what is this? Why? But then we get used to it. It became normalized. That's what we want to do with security. That's how we make it safe. How we keep our boring days, keep it safe by making it. And it does depend on where you're at, what resources you have. Or again, back to the processes and procedures. What is a process procedure? Is it heavily armed people? Then you normalize. Is it not that? Is it in plain sight individuals being security? Like most retail, they have plainclothes investigators walking through. So trying to find the pickpockets and everything else. That's it, and that's your security. But one thing about security operations that we lack a lot, and I know Mr. Price will love this, is the education and training. Not just our security force, not just our security professionals, but your employees, personnel. How many have received the HR email, your InfoSec, or what not to do? The PowerPoint you got to open up and click. Did you read this? Yes or no? Don't have to answer that. I don't want to get anybody in trouble. But you all just did. Guilty. I've seen it. Guilty as a very young security practitioner, not professional. You know what? I'm going to save time. Here's a PowerPoint. Click yes or no if you've read it. You're good to go. Education, training are key in your security operations. Giving your employees or your personnel or your students or family that education and training will help better protect everything you're trying to do. So knowing your security operations are key and the different facets in it is going to help you grow a better organization, a safer organization. Now with that, security professionals, best practices. Reach out to one another. Find out what best practices work. Unfortunately, we feel this is airing out our dirty ones sometimes. It's not. Ladies and gentlemen, get past that. The only way we get better is to communicate with each other. Because the best practices are going to be in a remote location, geographically separated location, in the US, India, Europe, France, we need best practices because with security, we all know that it's not a one and done. It's not black and white. Many people think that. Many people are taught that in academics, that it's black and white. Your stakeholders, your decision makers. It's not. We live in the purple area. We have to. We have to help each other because they're always changing. Reach out to one another. Build that network. Reach out to GCTI to help you. That's what they're there for. That's what we have to do. Best practices are going to get us where we need to be. You may have an access control that doesn't work because you're in a hot geographic location. That may work in a better one in the cold. You have a 6-foot perimeter fence that works great in Arizona. Does not do so well. Does not do so well in Norway because you get snow that goes up and over it, and I can walk right over it. Again, things that we have to understand. Best practices that we have to have knowledge of that make us better. Absolutely. Incident response and emergency management. You're going to hear about this a little bit later on from Sarah McManus, who's going to do this, but this is huge. This is huge nowadays because just the last 5 years alone, we have shown throughout the world how we lack in this, how we fail to plan in this, how we as security professionals may not be educated in this because of either a knee-jerk reaction or we haven't prepared enough for an incident. Yes, it takes time, it takes research, it takes education, it takes exercising, it takes funding. But the more we do and prepare for this, the less your organization, the less time your organization is going to get back up operational. Many active threats, if we use schools, how many schools have shut down completely? They weren't prepared. They didn't have a plan. They're bulldozed. How many corporations have not fully got back operational because of an active threat? It's happened. There's research data out there. I can tell you right now, after an active threat, a whole company shut down in the last year because they couldn't get back. Knowing your incident response and what you can and can't do, your capabilities of what you can and can't do are critical nowadays on the threats that are out there. We talked about drones. Stephanie was phenomenal, brought that up. What's your incident response for a drone? What can be it? If you come out as a security professional or in your cameras you're using, you see a drone come up, the drone is right next to the window of your C-level executive or that hallway, or the dean, or the chancellor. What do? What is your response? Or they're taking photographs. How do we respond? How do we handle the crisis? As security professionals, one thing is a post-recovery operation. Handling the crisis, many are good at it. We deal with it, but we forget the aftermath and how we can continue rebuilding that resiliency for our operation, for our personnel. And one thing to talk about to your leadership and a talking point for your leadership for crisis management is, I always ask this, I've done some consulting, I've always asked, I always ask, do you have medical care or medical benefits for your employees? Yes, we got the best. Outstanding. They have whatever Blue Cross Blue Shield, Medicaid, or whatever international. We have the best. How much does psychiatrist is it coming to your medical? I love asking that question. It's not to throw them off. It's not to be angry with them. But I love that question because they look at me. What are you talking about? Your employees just went through a traumatic event. Do you really think they're going to come right back to work immediately and not have circumstances that they're going to have to get through? Things to think about to help you with talking points for those C-level executives on that aspect. Another thing, we talked about funding, the importance, crisis management. Can you pay your employees while they're not at work? Ooh, tough question. Ask that out there. In your organization, can your employer pay your employees up to a month without coming to work? That's good. That's good. But it's a federal organization. They can move money. They do. They'd love to have them for that. But Your school, is there enough money to pay all?
Sure, so, I have enough for all.
Y'all are making this too easy on me. Very true. Some do. Some do. But do you have the staff? So first we'll talk about money. For that. Or I get the, oh, this. Why would I pay them? Management. As a security professional, you have to understand and know these. Know the plan of action and help your leadership, guide your leadership, what needs to be done, written into that plan. COVID helped us with that, the pandemic. Many corporations, organizations went hybrid. I always ask that too. If a threat or an event has happened, can you let your staff go hybrid? Are you going to give them a laptop? Well, they have their own, they can do it. Now we're going back to those internal threats. That's cyber threat. These are all questions you have to assess in a risk assessment, threat assessment, or vulnerability assessment to find out how you can prepare your leadership, prepare your plans, your processes to make them better. And we have to do that by relying on each other. The resources out there, GCTI, right? There's so much data and so much information out there about this. There's foundations and foundations. You don't have to remember. Contact GCTI. Contact each other. Network. Help you through. Some of the things that we covered today was a why. Stephanie gave a perfect example. Why it's so important to have physical security. For some of the threats we have. Cyber. Now we're talking AI. Quantum computing. All new threats. Rioting. Peaceful riots. Minneapolis. Portland, Oregon. Peaceful protesting turned into what? Very bad. A lot of businesses lost. Shut down. Knowing your threats. Criminals. Terrorists. We can spend all days, and you heard about it earlier. We have so many definitions of terrorism throughout the globe. But who is a terrorist? Who isn't? Climate change. I always laugh when I say, when people say, well, what's the biggest threat? I say, climate change. Oh man, the looks I get, it's like daggers come back. How can you say that? Because it is. That's a security professional. These are threats we have to worry about. We talk about some of the physical security attributes that are out there. Access control. What are the differences of access control? What do you have to choose? How do you choose? What do you do for that environment to make it better for what access control and organization? Perimeter security. We all want that chain link fence, right? 12 feet wall, make it look beautiful, concrete fortified. We have to make the right decisions using the processes that are out there. Which talks about our security operations. What security operations are best for your organization? And how can you do it? And it's not just the operational piece, but the education and training piece of your employees as well. Best practices, network, talk to each other, find out what works best for you, may work best for somebody else, or it may not. But the only way we're going to get better is by communicating. Incident and crisis management, something we lack. Research, reach out, become smart, being able to articulate to your leadership what happens and get your operation back up and running, be it school, campus, corporate, to get it back up and going. Those are key items. Lastly, resources. There's a ton of them. That's why I say that. Rely on each other. Rely on GCTI. Reach out to us. We'll give you a plethora of resources nonstop. Help each other out.
So I'd like to thank Sean Carr and Stephanie Prentice for their presentation on physical security, a critical role in current trends. Next up is a presentation on the Women for Ukraine by Ms. Tatiana Overina, the founder and CEO of Blue at One Consulting, and Dennis Kutsin, the founder for Firefighters for Peace. This movie is set with Tala, who is one of the producers of the video of Mariupol. All of these videos that this one you'll see, and there's another coming up, are stories collected by the Women for Ukraine initiative set to be incorporated into a documentary that will be produced and directed by Den Tolmer, Oscar and Emmy nominated movie producer, famous for producing Winter on Fire, Ukraine's Fight for Freedom. The Women in Security program initiative is also now in Ukraine, which is very good and needed. So with that, we'll start the show.
There are some explicit warnings in the videos that we're going to watch later. If there's any triggers, people here, we can talk about things. What I'd like to do is introduce Tatiana Overina. She is from Ukraine, Russia, Kazakhstan. She's and she's actually a crisis management expert, which I didn't know. I met Ms. Tatiana in New York as her organization Blue et One, which is blue and yellow. I figured that out. Amber told me in French. Blue and yellow, Ukraine. She is a seasoned executive with a wealth of experience in business and politics across the CIS region, Ukraine, Russia, and Kazakhstan. A strategic thinker with sharp analytical abilities, able to excel in uncertain environments and construct innovative solutions. Skilled in public affairs, strategic communications, and public relations, reputation management, brand management, digital communications, social media, key, philanthropy, and event management. And that was a fantastic event in New York. She's one of the ones that pulled it off. 2 weeks, it's amazing. So we're glad you're here and I'd like to welcome you. She has something she'd like to go over with you, and we have some videos to show you.
Hello. As we said before, I came from Ukraine and came in the very beginning of the war. So I know how it works and I know how it continues. And we talk about information security today. And this issue is very important for me, not only like information security, but from the point of view of informational war, because we are living in the time of informational war. And I came here with a mission to show you, present you the movie, the documentary movie about Mariupol and lost hope. This movie was created in the very beginning of the war with Ukrainian producers invested their own money for it, and they started doing several movies about war in Ukraine. And the goal was simple, just to record facts, evidence about the war, during the war, not after, not with some analysis, not with some transformational ideas, but just evidence. And this is Tala Pristaevskaya. She's the author of the idea of this movie, and she is one of the producers. And you can see some stories, some people who were involved in this very situation, who survived. It's very important. And the main idea of this movie, just to show you facts. And you can judge, you can create your own opinion when you watch it. I have to say, concerning to informational law, that a lot of people, especially in Russia, don't understand it, don't believe it. They have the opposite picture of these events. They think that this city was saved and rebuilt another time. So again, we are living in the epoch of informational war, and just check the fact and make your own opinion. This year, I think it's more.
Hello, my name is Stala Pristoyetska. I am a showrunner of the movie Mariupol Unlost Hope. Thank you for the opportunity to show you women working in security the important documentary evidence of Ukrainian women. Due to the war started by the Russian Federation against Ukraine, these women found themselves in a horrible situation, experienced terrible losses, but managed to survive. There is no concept more incompatible with security than war. Everyone is at risk. Ordinary people in Ukraine didn't believe in the large-scale invasion until the morning of 24th of February 2022. The women from our story didn't believe as well. Would it be possible to prepare to the war a pregnant woman at the last month of pregnancy, the mother of a teenager, and the journalist whose whole family lived in Mariupol all their lives and couldn't imagine existence outside the city? Did they have a chance to protect themselves by staying in Mariupol? Maybe you have a reassuring answer to this question. The war is still going on. Women's safety in the war zones is the question of extreme urgency. I hope you find the film's main message important and relevant. Thank you for your attention.
В Мариуполе люди говорили на разных языках. У нас и греки, и армяне, и украинцы, и русские даже там, и немцы, и, в общем, кого там только нет. И каждый мог спокойно жить. И у нас действительно в городе слышалась русская речь.
Мариуполь был богатый, красивый, современный, европейский, цветущий. Невероятно красивый город у моря. У нас были очень работящие люди. Люди работали на медкомбинате «Азовсталь», медкомбинате Ильича. У нас был судоремонтный завод с сухими доками. У нас был порт. — 8 лет. В Мариуполе был Азов. И почему-то Азов, которые нацики, да, жили рядом с нами, с русскоговорящими, дружили, ходили в одни парки, и почему-то они нас не убивали, пока не пришел русский мир. Потому что русский мир — это фашисты.
February 24th, 9:40 p.m. First day of war. It was a turbulent but relatively peaceful world when we went to bed. We awoke to find ourselves in a war. Doesn't matter what we dreamed about or what was going on beforehand. What was most jarring during that still dark dawn was the abrupt transformation that happened in an instant from a future of plans and hopes into an abyss of fear and despair, as if a warm summer turned to severe cold.
Война застала, как и всех, наверное, дома в постели. Вернее, я была у мамы в это время. Я приехала маму навестить и уехала от мужа. Мама в центральном районе, а муж на левобережье.
В 4 утра я проснулась от выстрелов.
Я спала, меня разбудил сын, сказал, началось.
Когда началась война, когда начались обстрелы, мы поехали искать подвалы, в которых можно у нас в городе спрятаться. Я была уже на 9-м месяце беременности.
Первые дня 3 мы просто слышали взрывы, выстрелы, но мы чувствовали себя достаточно спокойно, потому что, в принципе, Мариуполь это был форпост Украины, прифронтовой город.
В 2014 году у нас была угроза захвата Мариуполя. Мариуполь отстояли, и Мариуполь не стал оккупированным городом на тот момент. И мы думали, что точно так же будет и сейчас.
Когда стало известно, что уничтожена Волноваха, это небольшой город рядом с Мариуполем, что полностью уничтожена Сартана и город в осаде.
(1:40 p.m. Third day of war. When you're scared, you must do something. My friend, a psychiatrist, says that. When she hears the air raid sirens, she goes and mops the lobby and the stairs. She's done it 3 times already. Now the floors shine and she's overcome her fear. As for me, I write during the shelling. The writing is clearly nonsense. Nothing comes into my head, and that's why it's nonsense. It's rubbish. I'm scared. I count explosions, listen to the roar of the bombs, and write. During breaks, I look at my dog and cat. Somehow they solve their problems with fear.
Вообще не предполагали, как начали, когда запускать ракеты, что дома просто складываются, что их вырежают как кусок пирога, просто так раз, и нету там подъезда, пролета, что такое может быть. Поэтому мы спокойно сидели у себя в тамбуре, выходили соседи, мы общались, читали новости, ждали, все, сирена закончилась, заходили спокойно спать.
Все эти дни мой сын Богдан укреплял дом, он набирал мешки с землей, укреплял окна. Он бегал, грел соседям еду у нас в камине. Он бегал под обстрелом заряжать телефоны от генератора соседа. Вечерами мы собирались у камина, пели песни под гитару, он играл нам. Он металлику очень часто играл, но металлику мы не пели, конечно. Цоя пели, да, кукушку. Звезда по имени Солнце. Надо было очень громко петь, чтобы перепеть взрывы.
February 27th, 11:42 p.m. Fourth day of war. When we finally live through all this, I'll write about how scary it is to live inside a war, about different people and situations, about how things change in a split of a second, and how small problems become insignificant ones. Only important things remain. It appears that there are not so many of them. It's your life, lives of your family, your friends, and the people who surround you. It's that your house stays intact, that your city is not bombed by grads, your country is not tormented and tortured.
Утром был первый прилет в наш дом. Во дворе загорелись автомобили, дома и мой дом были посечены осколками, пробиты газовые трубы. Все окна вылетели. Я начал собирать растерянно стекла. Но тут прибежал мой сын из соседнего родильного дома и сказал: папа, срочно собирайся, идем с нами.
Прилет случился в дом через один от нашего. И нашим соседям ударной волной заблокировало двери. И мой сын Богдан, он побежал вытаскивать их через окно. Я бежала за ним по улице, это был обстрел, он не прекращался. Я говорила: Бодя, зайди, пожалуйста, в дом, потому что идет обстрел, если с тобой что-то произойдет, я этого не переживу. Он так повернулся, взял меня за плечи, труханул, говорит: мам, я их вытащу. Он вытащил этих бабушек через окно.
Прилет по частному сектору. Рядом с МЧС.
Когда людям нужно срочно убегать из дому, как ни странно, они набивают свои сумки совершенно ненужными вещами. Взял белье, взял одежду, которая была совершенно не нужна. Вдруг там оказались какие-то детские брюки, откуда они взялись, я не знаю. Они маленькие, короткие. И я почему-то захватил, не знаю, издание 1967 года, томик Рэя Брэдбери «Вино из одуванчиков».
March 1st, 4:42 p.m. On the 7th day of the war, we still pretended it wasn't here, as if it's sort of a misunderstanding and that it will all end soon. We were bombed and shot at, and still we were trying to smile at each other. Everyone had the same look in their eyes, confused and frightened. We didn't understand why these dreadful things were happening around us. What have we done wrong?
Когда начались первые обстрелы, главной темой разговора в Мариуполе были выбитые окна, стекла. Вы представляете, у нас выбили все стекла. Это ужас, это кошмар, это невозможно пережить. Все стекла выбиты. Прошло 3-4-5 дней, начали говорить: вы знаете, про стекла забыли. В наш дом было попадание снаряда. К счастью, не в нашу квартиру, но это же ужас, вы представляете? Дом посечен осколками, разворочен соседний подъезд. Это же ужас. Проходит еще неделя. Все забыли о попадании в дом. Все начали говорить о погибших людях. 3 числа отключили интернет и мобильную связь. Вот тогда я с Надей говорил последний раз.
Мой муж был на левом берегу, и я думала, что его нет вообще в живых. Я надеялась на то, что он живой.
Самое страшное, что я не знал, жива Надя или нет. Я слышал о том, что там погибли люди.
Я начала плакать периодически. Мама говорит: ну чего ты плачешь, он жив наверняка. Мы же тоже живы, но он о нас, говорит, ничего не знает, но мы же живы.
Я была в роддоме. Из-за обстрелов у меня прекратилась родовая деятельность. Получается, у меня было раскрытие на 5 сантиметров, но уже не было у нас в городе света, у нас уже не было воды, не было связи. Мне, получается, сделали срочное кесарево. Сказали, пока работает генератор, провести операцию.
Обстрел уже не прекращался. Инфраструктура города была полностью разрушена. Авиационные налеты усилились.
Подошли российские корабли и стреляли с российских кораблей по Мариуполю. Они убивали с земли нас, они с воздуха убивали. Решили, что, наверное, надо еще и с моря, потому что, мало, наверное.
Казалось, что не могут они брать, стрелять по домам, по жилым домам. А оказалось, что могут. Когда были взрывы, от этой взрывной волны стекла так ходили ходуном, как бы лежат тут в манежиках наши дети. Было страшно, потому что, чтобы их не убило просто осколками.
Температура упала до 7 градусов мороза. И здание родильного дома вымерзло мгновенно.
Получается, я родила 2 марта, 3 я полежала еще там, 4 обстреляли больницу на 17-м, погибли врачи во время операции. И начался вот этот как бы кипиш, вот эта паника, и было просто страшно оставаться. Я приняла решение, что как бы я уйду лучше с роддома, я буду со своей семьей. Я буду понимать хотя бы, как вместе с ней, потому что связи нет, и когда обстрел, я вот выхожу, там дом мой был напротив как бы роддома, я просто вообще не понимала, что в тот момент вообще с моей семьей, где это стреляют.
Пока звучали сирены, мы спускались в погреб всей семьей, пережидали там обстрелы, а потом мы просто не понимали, когда нас начнут бомбить, потому что не было сирен.
Мы пошли в соседние подвалы, которые были рядом с нашим домом, потому что, как у нас панельные дома, и в панельных домах лучше не находиться в подвале, потому что там один выход, там нету вентиляции, как бы если его в итоге засыпят, шансов выжить там очень мало.
Мы жили в подвале. Полные сутки кромешная темнота, кроме случаев, когда начинает работать генератор. Каждый раз, когда включался генератор, народ бросался подзаряжать свои телефоны. Поскольку розеток было немного, из каждой розетки выходил удлинитель с несколькими розетками. Телефоны не включались в эти розетки. В эти розетки включались новые удлинители. И как осьминог это все распространялось по всем коридорам. Казалось, зачем человеку в подвале телефон, потому что связи нет неделю, 2, 3 недели. Я думаю, что это был какой-то инстинкт, ощущение того, что если телефон заряжен, то рано или поздно он заговорит, и можно услышать голоса родных. А разряженный телефон был для человека не просто обузой, а напоминанием о том, что он никогда со своим близким поговорить не сможет.
March 5th, 12 p.m. 10th day of war. One woman has lost her hand, her leg, and her head. I hope the parts of my body will remain where they should be, even after an air bomb explosion. I don't know why, but it seems important to me. Although on the other hand, they won't bury people during active combat. That was the answer the cops gave us when we asked them what we were to do with the dead grandmother of one of our friends. They told us to put her on a balcony. I wonder, how many balconies have dead bodies there?
Эти люди и не только на балконах, и вот так, которых мы никогда не узнаем, там дома разрушились, дома сгорели, а еще есть люди, которые закапывали просто во дворе. Вот мой двоюродный брат погиб, его закопали во дворе.
Подхожу, а лежат 4 трупа около входа в подъезд моих соседей, и на лавочке девушка, женщина лежит. А в 1,5 метрах воронка. Я перескочил через эти трупы, поднялся быстро на 5-й этаж, где я живу. Тут грохот, влетают стекла. Я шаг назад в коридор, вырвало даже дверь. Слышу так тух-тух, тух-тух. А у меня на журнальном столике стояла клетка с попугаем. Я его назвал Баламут. Думаю, наверное, Баламута зацепило, и, наверное, он погиб. Выглядываю, а он сидит в клетке, живой. Я схватил его и быстренько в коридор. А стучали так часы, они упали, разбились, и стрелка запала.
Очень запомнила девочку одну. Ей было 4. Ее принес на руках ее отец. Ее положили на такую кушетку в коридоре. И она хрипела. И где-то минут через 20 она у меня на глазах умерла. Все время рядом с ней сидел отец. И он стоял на коленях перед своей дочкой. И он выл, как раненое животное. Он все время повторял, почему она, а не я. И я понимала его вопрос. Я до сих пор мучаюсь вопросом тем же.
March 6th, 10:32 p.m., 11th day of war. I go outside in breaks between bombings. I need to take my dog for a walk. She whines constantly, shakes and hides behind my legs. My yard, surrounded by high residential buildings, is quiet and dead. I'm no longer afraid to look around. Across the yard, the entrance to the building number 105 is burning. The flames have devoured 5 floors and are slowly chewing on the 6th. Through the windows of one apartment, the fire burns almost cozily, like it's in a fireplace. The glassless windows are black as charcoal. On each side hang curtains half burned by the fire. I look at all this calmly, feeling doomed.
Когда на девятиэтажку скидывают фосфорную бомбу, девятиэтажка вспыхивает как свечка полностью. И вспыхивают все люди, которые находятся там. Они сгорают заживо. Фосфор поддерживает горение. Они применяли системы залпового огня. Там были Искандеры, там были солнцепёки, там были Тосы, Грады, Буратино. Там было все возможное, что придумал человек для того, чтобы убивать другого человека. И самое страшное был самолет, потому что к звукам взрывов, градов мы уже как-то более-менее привыкли, и они были не такие громкие. Когда сбрасывались авиабомбы на город, это было очень громко. Очень громко.
А когда начали бомбить с самолетов, вот появился страх тогда уже, я понимала, что там как бы смерти, но уже не избежать. Падала в соседних, да, допустим, дворах, а дом наш так трусился. Я думала, что прилетел уже в наш дом.
В бассейне тут прилетела авиабомба.
Сильных 2 взрыва. Я вышел на улицу, с соседями разговариваю, что бы это могло быть. Они говорят, это, наверное, в центре города. Схватил камеру, побежал, а это... Скинули 2 авиабомбы на нашу горбольницу номер 3.
3-я больница, Мариуполь, роддом.
Она была очень красивая, внутри стояло самое современное оборудование. Когда я подходил, это был какой-то Армагеддон. Все разбито, стекол нету в окружающих домах, все черное в пыли.
Я знаю, что рядом в больнице были раненые. Может быть, россияне решили попасть по раненым, а промазали, я не знаю. Потому что в роддоме были женщины и были дети новорожденные.
Под ноги, пацаны, смотрите под ноги, куда наступаете.
У нас там во дворе роженица, она лежала в том самом роддоме, вот, родила девочку, назвали Милана или Милена, вот, и она говорит, да, попала эта бомба в отделение, где груднички, вот, где вот в этих камерах кислородных, и они все сгорели.
Обошел с другой стороны на проспект Мира, у нас стояли большие тополя, а их как ножом срезали. И навстречу женщина идет. А я спрашиваю, а что там? Она говорит, вы туда не ходите, там одни трупы.
March 9th, 7 p.m., 14th day of war. My dog starts howling, and I understand they will start again now. I stand on the street. It's daytime, but a graveyard silence surrounds me. No cars, no voices, no children, no babushkas sitting on the benches. Even the wind has died. Still, there are a few people here. They lay motionless by the house or in the parking lot, covered by cast-off clothes or blankets. I don't want to look at them. I'm afraid I might see someone I know.
«11 марта, знаете, когда летит снаряд, слышно, как он шуршит. Когда летит мина, слышно, как она свистит. А когда летит в тебя, ты не слышишь ничего». Мы не услышали ничего. Я только услышала взрыв, дым. Я успела сделать вот так, сделать 2 шага вглубь дома. Тут же развернулась и побежала в коридор и на кухню, потому что все мои были там. А сын лежал на боку, на правом боку. Я сразу поняла, что, вероятнее всего, это ранение смертельное, потому что у него глаза были полуприкрыты. И я видела, как его правая щека, которая была ниже, наполняется кровью. А еще было очень много пуха, потому что он был в классном пуховике таком, The North Face, и пух полетел, у него на губе так пушинка лежала, я все время пыталась ее убрать как-то так инстинктивно. У него было ранение в область шеи сзади и затылок. Я взяла его рукой, вот так держала, и, извините, у меня руки трусятся. Я его держала, и руке было очень горячо, потому что пульсировала кровь, очень горячая. Был запах крови, такой сладкий запах крови везде. Вот в доме запах пороха, запах крови и звук льющейся воды, потому что осколком пробила отопительную систему, хлестала вода. И были крики, потому что кричала моя племянница, ей 14 лет, кричала моя сестра. Хрипы еще были. Хрипел муж сестры, у него было несколько проникающих ранений в область грудной клетки. У него была агония. Я запомнила такие голубые вязаные носки, в которых был Богдан. Я подумала, у него не будут мерзнуть ноги. И я еще успела подложить ему под голову вязаную кофту и накрыть лицо таким полотенцем розовым лежало. Тела мы оставили там, потому что шел обстрел. И надо было спасать тех, кто жив, потому что мы все вчетвером были ранены. Как я узнала потом, в дом было еще несколько прилетов, и дом сгорел. На сегодняшний день я не знаю, был мой сын похоронен, не был. Скорее всего, тела сгорели прямо с дома, скорее всего.
March 11th, 11 p.m., 16th day of war. 3 days ago, my elder nephew's friend came by. He told us there had been a direct hit of the fire station. Firefighters died. I'm sure I'll die soon. It's only a matter of several days. Everyone awaits their death. I just wish mine not to be too scary.
Тетя Надя, это моя крестная, у них там есть подвал, у них как бы дом, они оборудовали мешками, чтобы окна как бы не вылетели. Я пошла туда сама с малым, получается.
И они остались, там Никиту все начали нянчить, там, обрабатывать ему пупок, да, я поняла. У Юльки был кесарево, ей обрабатывали шрам тоже. Никита, скажем так, был, несмотря на то, что его не выносили практически гулять, 1 раз или 2 раза его вынесли, он такой желтенький был, желтенький, он не видел, практически не было света. Но когда с ним разговаривали, у нас даже видео сохранилось его, он так смотрел, всегда слушал.
Пусть мама увидит, пусть мама придет, пусть мама меня непременно найдет. Ведь так не бывает на свете, что были потеряны дети.
там лежал, я ему рассказывала про то, что вот его папа, он придет, он будет гордиться Никитой, а папа воюет, папа украинский воин, вот, и он, я говорю, он придет, увидит, какой Никита сильный, что он самый главный, там, он так слушал меня внимательно. Так вот, мы заметили, что Никита в подвале внизу, он начинал плакать перед самыми обстрелами. Но я уже по теории вероятности понимала, что сейчас прилетит в наш дом, и это, в принципе, 100% прилетит, потому что они уже все, что можно, они добили вокруг. Теперь они будут убивать наш дом. Ну вот они убьют и нас. Была такая вспышка какая-то, а потом какой-то очень жуткий треск. Все люди сидели, все были на первом этаже, и дети были в подвале.
Мы находились в подвале, как бы мы вообще не могли понять, что происходит. И было непонятно, что столько людей, где кто. Я помню, как я кричала: «Мама, мама», говорю, «ты жива?» Ну, как я слышала вот этот удар, такой удар вверху, панику. И непонятно вообще, ну, что с людьми, которые вверху.
И люди стали выскакивать, люди стали выбегать из дома. Мой племянник Кирюша, ему 9 лет, и он кричал и плакал, он кричал: «Мамочка, пожалуйста, мамочка, я не хочу». Мы думали, что в него попал снаряд.
Такое было чувство, что дом, говорит, как на 45 градусов наклонился и стал обратно. Я выскочила просто так босиком, без куртки, без всего. Мы с мамой бежали.
И они побежали к себе в 9-этажку. Вот на тот момент, в тот день, когда они убежали под снарядами, под бомбами, под минами, под всем. Бежали, просто все вокруг взрывалось. Мы не знали даже, живы они или нет.
Из всех из нас я была единственная ходячая. То есть нас осталось 4 раненых. Я, мама, племянница и сестра. Богдан и Павел были уже мертвы. Это мой сын и муж сестры. Мою сестру и мою племянницу вынесли соседи, и соседи же отповезли их в больницу. Когда в больнице врачи снимали верхнюю одежду, и санитары выносили эту окровавленную одежду в коридор возле эвакуационного выхода, и там лежала просто вот так гора до потолка окровавленных вещей.
С этой стороны не будет от стенки работать. И сюда к стене.
Да, выскакивай.
Зашибись.
Все, дальше сами.
Маму шили без наркоза. Она кричит, ей больно. А врач смеется, говорит: да ладно, не кричи, это прививка. Ну, они пытались шутить, да. А раненые лежали в коридорах под стенками, просто на полу. А там лежали отдельно руки, отдельно ноги. Отдельно даже голова одна была. А были такие дни, когда в коридоре больницы стоял такой уровень крови, что ты идешь, она у тебя хлюпает так под ногами.
Грудничок не знаю, а это позавчера, это все раненые. Раненые привезли живых, но спасти не удалось. Совсем крошка. Ко всему привыкаешь, но потом вечером это с головы не выходит. Все, идемте, пока не стреляют.
Когда меня перевязали, я шла по коридору, хотя бы понять, где мои вообще, где они. И я увидела 2 военных в больнице, это были солдаты ВСУ. И я подошла к военному, и в общем-то, на тот момент у меня уже было намерение в голове что-то с собой сделать, потому что у меня был вопрос большой. Как? И я подошла к солдату, говорю: слушай, ты можешь мне где-то достать 1 сигарету? Мне дико хотелось покурить. И, видимо, у меня было все написано на лице, хотя я ему ничего не говорила. Он говорит: да, подожди, я достану тебе сигарету. Он мне достал сигарету и говорит: а ну-ка пойдем со мной покурим. Мы вышли, черный дым вокруг, летят снаряды, летят мины. Мы закурили, а я еще думаю, что этот солдат как-то странно ко мне тулится. Я только потом поняла. Он меня собой прикрывал. Он-то в броне, он меня закрывал от осколка. А я стою вся в крови, у меня вот светлая была кофта. Вот так у меня кровь. Руки в крови, вот так. Кровь сына, кровь мамы, кровь родных. А я даже руки помыть не могу, потому что воды нет. Я ему сказала, что случилось. Он взял меня за плечи, начал вот так трусить и говорит: ну, если тебя оставили в живых, ты сейчас идешь к врачам и говоришь, чем я могу вам помочь. И ты помогаешь всем, чем можешь.
И рядом стоял огромный такой пандус для хранения кислородных баллонов, потому что кислород для медицины был очень важен. Там было около 100 баллонов с кислородом. Кто-то из мужиков сообразил, и они побежали выпускать из этих баллонов кислород. Через 3 дня в этот пандус с этими пустыми баллонами было прямое попадание. Машины, которые стояли рядом, сгорели совершенно. И я так понимаю, что мы чудом избежали смерти, потому что если бы баллоны были полными, то и от подвала ничего не осталось бы.
На 4-й день в больнице врачи сказали нам, что поскольку у меня и у мамы есть ноги, нам нужно уходить в подвал, чтобы не занимать место, куда могут положить еще раненых. Когда мы ехали, волонтер спросил у меня: мы едем вас отвезти в драмтеатр или в филармонию? Я сказала: в филармонию. Драмтеатр разбомбили через 2 дня после того, как мы оказались в филармонии.
Хорошо. Вот смотрите. Вот здесь у нас собираются люди для выдачи питания. В первую очередь мы детям, женщинам, старикам, а потом уже мужики. Ну, кто поест, кому достанется, останется. Здесь люди организовались. Да, мы попросили заколачивать окна, как организовывают. Тоже живут люди, видишь, дети, люди. Здрасте. Ну, в этой комнатке у нас 15 человек. Потому что здесь тоже люди лежат, сидят, кто-то стоя спит, кто-то лежа. Вот здесь, в полуподвальном помещении, у нас находятся люди. Вот здесь люди лежат, вот здесь. Здравствуйте. Здравствуйте.
Мы услышали такой странный звук, 2 таких странных звука, тяжелое какое-то, очень тяжелое, как будто все сотряс, ну, я не знаю, было ощущение, что весь город сотрясся от этого.
Это же надо так откровенно, так цинично и так жестоко. Здесь беженцы прятались в драмтеатре. Там осталось под завалами больше 1000 мертвых людей, которые сбежали с окраин города в надежде, что их пощадят.
Что, пару раз добавили потом
Пометочки?
Какими-то более мелкими снарядами. Добавили, и оно дополнительно горело.
Страшно. Да.
Вот он, русский мир, ребята.
Разбомбили драмтеатр, в котором, не было военных, в котором были беременные девочки, в которых были дети. Большими буквами было написано «дети». Погибших там 1000. В подвале находилось 200 человек, именно в подвале, которые остались живы. Вверху, которые люди находились, там их было около 1000.
March 16th, 12 a.m., 21st day of war. Do you know what night shelling is like? It's like death sucking all the juice from you. You can't let yourself sleep at night because you'll have peaceful dreams, which you'll emerge from and plunge into a nightmare. First, the sound, like someone is using a huge compass to measure the distance to your house, to hit you more precisely. Then the shell flies, and you hear a huge hammer smashing the tinned roof and a scary roar as if a metallic giant in iron-shod boots stomps on everything, smashing people, houses, trees. You sit and realize that you can't move. You can't run. There's no sense in screaming. Nowhere to hide. It will find you if it wants to. Then silence falls, an empty silence, and we wait. What will hit us next? Then if we hear another sound, we become numb. Because we don't understand what it means, what kind of death it will bring to us. Fast or dreadful, yet always painful.
В филармонии мы ночевали с мамой на втором этаже в концертном зале, мы спали на полу. На третью ночь начался такой обстрел, что я просто схватила ее на себя, с криком «быстро в подвал!». Вылетали стекла, там был прекрасный красивый витраж из цветных стекол филармонии Мариуполя. И он вылетел просто весь. Когда мы забежали в подвал, туда бежали все люди, потому что в ту ночь обстрел был просто невероятный. Такого еще не было. Ну, нас просто убивали. Спустились в подвал, там находилось около 300 людей, около 60 детей возрастом от 2 месяцев до 8 лет. Туалет находился на первом этаже филармонии. А в какой-то момент обстрелы были такие, что люди ходили в туалет прямо в подвале на ведра, и не было разницы, мужчины, там мужчины, женщины. А мы там были не людьми, мы там были организмами.
I think no one of us has looked into the mirror since the war started. Frankly, how I look doesn't bother me. It's become absolutely unimportant because a very high probability exists that in a split second, you'll be dead. So it doesn't make any difference how you look in the mirror. My hair is dreadful. It turned into a weed. But it doesn't bother me at all. Everyone wears hats. We pull them down to our eyes because we don't want to spend precious water on washing our faces. I dream of 2 things. The shelling stops, and I take a hot shower before I die.
Ты уже живешь в состоянии, ну, ты как бы, тебя еще как бы не убили, ты вроде как живой, но ты не живой. Все эти дни в подвале мне больше всего хотелось помыть волосы. Очень сильно хотелось. Когда мы находились в доме, еще в доме родительском, во время авианалетов я все время обнимала сына, он меня целовал в макушку и говорил, что «Мама, у тебя такие мягкие волосы». Мне очень хотелось их помыть, чтобы они снова были мягкими.
Я думал, поскорее бы это все закончилось. Поскорее бы оно просто убило меня, бабушку, дедушку, и все бы это закончилось. Вот так я и думал. Ну, потому что, ну что, там, молиться, чтобы что? Ну, Господь, Бог, там, пусть снаряды падают в соседние дома, ну, только не в этот дом. Ну, как надо было молиться, я не знаю. Вот.
За день до того, как мы вышли, филармонию расстреливали из танка в упор. Я маму поставила под несущую балку, обняла ее сзади за плечи. И это был очень страшный момент, потому что мне не хотелось вот так вот умереть, не видя солнца, грязный, немытый, там, в каком-то состоянии человека, который потерял человеческое лицо, вот чисто физически. И я не говорю там про моральные какие-то ориентиры, да. И я стою, думаю, так, молюсь всем, кто-нибудь да услышит. И я стою и думаю про себя, вот только не так, я не хочу так, я не хочу в этой яме. Я выйду под грады, но я не хочу в этой яме, и никто даже ж не узнает.
Я сидела и была в аду, и я думала, что это весь ад такой на земле теперь. Что твоя жизнь от тебя не зависит. Она зависит от людей, которые стреляют просто в тебя ни за что. Самое сложное было вот не сойти с ума. Это было для меня самое сложное.
Люди исходили с ума и заканчивали жизнь самоубийством, просто не выдерживая этого всего. И да, сосед повесился. Ну, во время бомбежки повесился, просто не выдержал вот этого всего.
Я понимала, что если мы останемся там, через несколько дней там начнется смертоубийство, просто натуральное, за еду и воду.
И мне было уже все равно, я подумала, что даже если мы выйдем и нас убьют по дороге, то это будет лучше, чем мы останемся там, в подвале, и если нас не убьют, то я-то уж точно сойду с ума.
Это было безумно страшно решиться выйти, потому что на первом этаже, когда мы ждали, пока нам откроют дверь, на нас летели сверху стекла, там бетона, куски. Прилеты были по самой филармонии, по верхним этажам. Все это было. И были люди, которые так и не решились выйти. Была семья молодая, ребята из Сартаны, Аня и Андрей. И они были с 2-месячным ребенком своим. И они так и не решились выйти туда. И мы вышли под обстрел.
Мы там тоже слышали, что люди, которые уезжали, их как бы простреливали на блокпостах, ну, российские военные. Как бы вероятность выжить там больше, говорю, мне кажется, чем когда ты сидишь просто ждешь, когда прилетит в твой дом. Говорю, тем более, как бы воды у нас уже как бы вода заканчивалась. Выходить, греть возможности малому, чтобы здесь смесь не было просто. Смесь тоже как бы уже заканчивалась. Ну, как бы в любом случае нужно было выбираться.
Я могла спасти кота, я не знаю, потому что я не знаю, что с ним сейчас. Мы, ну, как бы спешили, да, нас там забирали, нужно было подняться на 5-й этаж взять Йосика. Вот, и я подумала, что могут ехать без меня, ну, короче, я струсила. Просто получается, что, ну, кот у нас был такой залюбленный, домашний, он не способен на выживание сам. И мы его бросили. А он не понимает, за что мы его бросили. Вот и все. Я понимаю, он... Ну, то есть, как извиняться, я не знаю. И как и смысл. Наверное, это глупо плакать из-за кота, но мне правда очень жаль. Просто сколько я видела кошку однажды. Короче, когда стреляли в этот дом, было попадание. Ну, прямое. Я видела кошку, она шла такая, через дорогу переходила. Не знаю, чья эта кошка была чужая. Она вот так переходила, пригибалась. Потому что она понимала, что что-то происходит, и она ничего не могла сделать. И она, короче, проходила такая, и, ну, такая... Ну, мне так тоже... Я представляю, сейчас Йосик так же ходит, пригибается, или вообще, я не знаю.
March 19th, 11:35 a.m., 24th day of war. If we hadn't left the city, we would have been dead by now. At least, I would have been dead. There were fewer and fewer people in our basement. People were leaving. Rumors spread that many people were lucky and getting out of this hell, but they were only rumors. No one could trust them. One after the other, our neighbors from the basement disappeared. The moment someone found some gas or friends with a car, they left. No one said goodbye. No one packed their bags. They left everything behind and ran.
Две машины было, обе без стекол, обе с какими-то пробитыми там чем-то, не знаю, в общем, туда осколки попадали. И 16 человек туда в машину всунулось, плюс животные, вот, и мы поехали. То, что мы увидели дворами, поехали, это просто не было дома. Ну, просто дом стоит, а внутри у него как сердце, вот как вырвали, знаете, вырезано. То есть он стоит, там дальше окошки есть, как бы он как бы есть, а сердца у него нет. Что-то, видно, попало такое, что вырезали.
Сейчас Мариуполь — это братская могила. Это мертвый город. Мариупольцы лишились всего. А у мариупольцев было реально все.
Могилы под домом, людям негде хоронить, и они хоронят прямо под домом.
Они же не просто нас убили, они же наше прошлое убили. Мы даже не можем вернуться в город, забрать фотографии близких людей, забрать локоны наших детей и их детские альбомы. У меня сейчас, в том месте, где душа у людей, да, где-то. А вот Мариуполь — это выжженная земля, и у меня внутри такая же.
Мы когда ехали через блокпосты российские, нас спрашивали: Мариуполь, как у вас там в Мариуполе? Я хотела сказать: да приезжайте, посмотрите сами. А говорит: окошечко закройте, а у нас окошечек нет, но там какие-то детей простудите. А я думала: вот, суки, значит, детей в подвалах вы убиваете, детей в Мариуполе вы убиваете, а тут вы делаете вид, что вы переживаете за... Ну, короче, это циничные гады. Вот и все, что я могу сказать.
Проводим фильтрацию населения на выявление непосредственно участников боевых действий со стороны Украины.
На блокпостах ДНР раздевают всех мужчин. И на предмет обнаружения на их телах татуировок, связанных с Азовом. То, что они называют свастиками, да, россияне, это калавраты. Калаврат — это древнеславянский символ солнца. Они раздевают мужчин, при мне избивали нескольких мужчин. А моему другу, который тоже вырвался из Мариуполя, ему дуло автомата в рот засовывали, сбили прикладом в грудь. Просто потому что.
Мобильник. Я сейчас. Заряженный? Откуда? В смысле? Машина блядь, есть. 4 дня уже, блядь. Машина. И что, я похож на бабушку? Не жалуюсь. Вижу.
Если они по каким-то причинам решают, что ты потенциально опасен, например, если ты работал на телевидении, ты потенциально опасен. Например, если у тебя есть хоть какая-то родственная связь с теми, кто воюет с украинской стороны, ты потенциально опасен. Один мой близкий друг сейчас находится в Донецке, называется это «На подвале», за его проукраинскую позицию, которую они нашли у него в телефоне. О судьбе его я не знаю ничего больше. Я не знаю, жив он или нет.
Я писала про то, что я жива. И я думала, этот пост, будет для тех людей, которые которые меня знают, которые волнуются, да. Потом вдруг ни с того ни с сего начал какой-то отклик такой большой. Мне начали звонить какие-то люди, спрашивать про интервью, говорить. Я вдруг увидела свои посты, которые начали печатать в разных там каких-то газетах, каких-то сайтах.
министр иностранных дел Литвы Габриэлюс Ландсбергис принимал участие, по-моему, в Совете министров иностранных дел Европы. Он сказал, я не буду там говорить речей или что-то доказывать или показывать. Я вам прочитаю письмо, пост Надежды Сухоруковой. И это была самая лучшая речь, самое лучшее доказательство, самое лучшее внушение. Это просто как бы заколдовало зал, потому что все поняли, что это голос человека, который там находится. Я думаю, это тоже была одной из тех очень важных капель, которые все-таки разбудили, наконец, Европу.
And they fight for their independence, sovereignty of the country.
It's our land. We didn't do anything wrong. It's just Putin's ambitions.
UK support Ukraine. UK support Ukraine.
И когда она начала выходить за рамки там, моего там, Фейсбука, моих знакомых, потом мне начали говорить люди, с которыми я была, ну, что ты действительно ты нас подставляешь. Короче, мы с мамой уехали вдвоем. Блокпосты там стояли в основном ДНРовцы. Я поняла, что если они меня сидентифицируют, да, то если увидят мой паспорт, как бы свяжут вот это все, эту всю шумиху со мной, то будет очень плохо. Телефон смотрели паспорт, но я все время каждый раз вдыхала, потом пропускали, выдыхала. Там очень было много блокпостов, пока мы ехали.
И когда я вижу репортажи о том, что благородные ДНРовцы раздают мариупольцам хлеб, серьезно, ребята, вы раздаете хлеб людям, у которых было все, и у которых вы забрали все, серьезно, вы хлеб раздаете.
Как вас зовут? Милана, а ты? Диана. Держи, Диана.
То, что случилось в Мариуполе, это варварство, зверство, это какой-то каменный век. И то, что продолжает происходить сейчас, Мариуполю нет помощи. Никакой.
Я почему-то была уверена, что если узнают много людей, то спасут мариупольцев. Мариуполь спасут. Мариуполь узнали везде, но ничего не изменилось для жителей этого города.
Всем, кто прошел Мариуполь, мы все покалеченные, изувеченные уроды. Мы не можем жить прежней жизнью. Если ты прошел Мариуполь и ты просто потерял имущество, ты красавчик и везунчик.
Сейчас я боюсь, что может быть где-то повторение того же, что мы как бы пережили. Боишься, что ты вроде приехала в выдох, и ты можешь опять как бы увидеть это снова. Я как бы даже не строю планов, я так надеюсь, что все просто сейчас закончится, мы просто вернемся обратно в Украину, приехать в Мариуполь, я не знаю, в каком там состоянии у нас находится, что-то делать для того, чтобы он восстановился.
Пока я держусь как-то за эту жизнь, потому что во мне сейчас очень большая ненависть и боль. И эта ненависть помогает мне дышать. Я разложила себе возможные варианты развития событий. Первый вариант — сойти с ума, пускать слюни и сидеть, покачиваясь в углу. Второй вариант — довести себя до инфаркта. Третий вариант — наложить на себя руки. И четвертый вариант — пройти реабилитацию и попытаться вернуться к подобию, к какому-то подобию нормальной жизни. Я так села, расписала эти варианты. И я поняла, что первые 3 Богдан бы не одобрил.
Привет, скажи, пожалуйста, как называется этот поселок, где мы будем жить? Где ты живешь сейчас? Гируляй. Его поселили где-то под Клайпедой в коттедже. Там очень красивая природа, очень сосновый лес там. Потом, он говорит, до моря у меня 500 метров, Балтийского моря. Он ходит туда, гуляет в Балтийском море. А теперь он ждет меня. И я хочу вам сказать, что я очень надеюсь, что мы победим обязательно. Украина победит. Вот. И возможно, что... Даже невозможно, а вот это время будет, которое я буду жить в Литве, это время у меня будет на то, чтобы собрать все свои, то, что я помню, все свои посты воедино и попытаться взять и написать книгу.
Переживаешь,
Ну, я всегда мечтала где-то жить вот там. Ну, мы очень много путешествовали, я мечтала, вот мне нравится Венгрия, вот мне нравится еще что-то, вот Прага, вот бы я там в Чехии где-то еще. А сейчас я не хочу нигде жить, кроме Украины. Вот сейчас, казалось бы, есть такие шансы, да, вот что можно где-то найти себя, там, в Евросоюзе или куда-то еще уехать. А я не хочу никуда. Я хочу жить в Украине.
April 24th, 1:15 a.m., 60th day of war. There are so many angels in the sky now that their wings can blow the clouds away and make sky blindly blue. These are our Ukrainian angels. They blow the clouds away like curtains opening to look down on earth. Down there, not everything is good. Something explodes, falls apart, burns. But our angels know no fear. Each one finds his people, those closest, those left alone on earth without them, those who need help. They cry with us and then feel better. They have the eyes of the members of our families, our friends, our warriors. They don't know how to comfort. So how can one comfort those who are unable to be comforted? Today it's become known that during the blockade, 40,000 people left the city. Hundreds of thousands of others are still inside that hell. With every new day, it becomes harder and harder for them to survive. Please help them. Tell the truth about my city.